Your mate will love you exactly as you are. The bond ensures it. That's what Elena Mullins clung to. After her mother's death, those final words becoming a lifeline through years of abuse and neglect. But Elena would discover that sacred bonds break against cruelty, that destined love can be suffocated by shame, that you can be someone's fated mate and still die alone in a basement, while they celebrate choosing someone else. Because the moon goddess might forge unbreakable connections, but she can't force broken men to be brave enough to honor them. Chapter 1. The Basement Prison. The basement smelled of mildew and desperation. Elena Mullins pressed her cheek against the cold concrete floor, her wrists raw and bleeding from the silver chains that bound her to the support beam. Upstairs, she could hear music, the kind that made the floorboards vibrate, the kind that celebrated something beautiful while she rotted in the dark. Today was the day. Today, her childhood friend, her packmate, her everything, Javier Ingram, would choose his Luna. The entire Shadowmere pack had gathered in the great hall above her head, their wolves howling in celebration, their voices raised in songs of unity and strength. And she was here, below them, forgotten. Elena? A small voice whispered from the top of the stairs. Elena's heart lurched. Chris? Chris, you shouldn't be here. If they catch you, I brought you water. 13-year-old Chris Gay descended the stairs carefully, a chipped cup trembling in her small hands. Her eyes, too knowing for her age, swept over Elena's broken form with poorly concealed horror. And bread. It's from yesterday, but it's something. Elena's throat tightened. Chris was the only one in the entire pack who remembered she existed, who saw her as something more than the cursed Omega who'd brought shame to Shadowmere. You're too kind to me, Elena whispered, accepting the cup with shaking hands. The water was lukewarm and tasted faintly of rust, but it was heaven. Too kind for your own good. Mama says kindness isn't about what people deserve, it's about who we choose to be. Chris sat on the bottom step, her thin legs dangling. She wore her best dress, pale blue with white flowers. Everyone upstairs was dressed in their finest. Everyone except Elena. I wish you could see her, Elena. Janelle Bright. She's so beautiful. The name pierced Elena's chest like a silver blade. Janelle Bright. The golden wolf of the Northern Territories. Daughter of an alpha. Sister to warriors. Blessed with beauty that made grown men weep and strength that made enemies flee. She had arrived at Shadowmere 3 months ago, and Javier had been different, distant, cold. No, he'd been cold to Elena for much longer than 3 months. I'm sure she is, Elena managed, her voice steady despite the agony blooming in her chest. The mate bond, that sacred, unbreakable thing her mother had promised, thrummed weakly beneath her ribs. She'd felt it snap into place on her 18th birthday, 2 years ago, felt it connect her to Javier like a golden thread, binding their souls. But Javier had felt nothing, or worse, he had felt it and chosen to ignore it. She's wearing white, Chris continued, oblivious to the torture her words inflicted, with diamonds in her hair. And Javier, he looks happy. Elena, I've never seen him smile like that. Good, Elena lead. He deserves happiness. But what about you? The question hung in the musty air between them. What about Elena? What about the girl who'd grown up beside Javier, who'd trained with him, laughed with him, dreamed with him? What about the Omega whose wolf had recognized its mate, who'd tried to tell him, who'd been met with disgust and denial? I'll be fine, Elena said softly. I always am. Chris's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I heard Mama talking to Papa, she said. She said once Javier chooses Janelle, once the Luna ceremony is complete, they're going to... Her voice broke. They're going to reject you formally, in front of the whole pack, and then they're going to exile you. Elena had known this was coming. Of course she had. You couldn't keep a failed mate bond secret forever, couldn't keep an Omega hidden in the basement indefinitely. Eventually, the shame had to be dealt with, permanently. When? Elena asked. Tonight, after the ceremony. Chris wiped her nose with the back of her hand. Elder Hubert said it would cleanse the pack of its weakness. Hubert Phillips, the pack's eldest council member, a man whose hatred for Omegas was matched only by his love of tradition and cruelty. He'd been the one to chain Elena down here 3 months ago, after she'd made the mistake of approaching Javier at a pack gathering, of trying one last time to make him see, to make him feel what she felt. Javier had looked at her with such disgust, such profound revulsion. "She's delusional," he'd said to Hubert, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "She thinks we're mates. Can you imagine? Me, the future alpha, bound to that? Not even her name. Just that." "You should go back upstairs," Elena told Chris gently, "before someone notices you're gone. But go, sweet girl. And thank you for remembering me." Chris climbed the stairs reluctantly, casting one last heartbroken look over her shoulder before disappearing. The door clicked shut, and Elena was alone again with the darkness and the chains and the unbearable weight of the mate bond that refused to die. Upstairs, someone began to sing. A traditional pack song, one Elena knew by heart. "By moon and blood, by fang and claw, we bind our souls by ancient law. 2 hearts, 1 pack, forever blessed. The Luna rises, the Alpha rests." Elena closed her eyes and let the tears come. She'd been 8 years old when her mother died, leaving her orphaned and alone. The pack had taken her in reluctantly, because Omegas were burdens, weak links in the chain of strength that made a pack powerful. But her mother had been beloved, had been the pack's healer, and so they'd allowed little Elena to stay. She'd worked hard to prove her worth, trained harder than anyone, studied pack law and history, learned every healing herb and remedy her mother had known. She'd made herself useful, invisible, unobtrusive, and she'd loved Javier with the quiet, desperate love of someone who knows they're not supposed to want things. He'd been kind to her once, before his father died, and he became the alpha heir. Before responsibility and expectation crushed whatever softness he'd possessed. Before he learned that loving an Omega would make him weak in the eyes of the pack. The music swelled above her head. Any moment now, Javier would take Janelle's hand. He would speak the words of binding, would mark her neck with his teeth, would forge a chosen bond to replace the fated one he'd rejected. And Elena would feel it, would feel her soul tearing, as he gave to another what was meant to be hers. She pulled against the chains, silver burning her skin, and bit down on her lip to keep from screaming. The bond thrummed, weakly, dying, and then, a howl, long and low and filled with ancient power. It didn't come from the great hall above. It came from outside, from the forest that surrounded Shadowmere, from something big and dangerous and very, very close. The music stopped. Footsteps thundered across the floor above her head. Voices raised in alarm. More howls, the pack responding, defensive, territorial. Elena lifted her head, her wolf stirring for the first time in months. That scent, even through the concrete and the locked door and the years of dirt and neglect, she could smell it. Pine and mountain snow, ancient earth and burning amber. Power that made her wolf whimper and her heart race. An alpha, not just any alpha, the Alpha King. The door at the top of the stairs exploded inward with a crash that made Elena's ears ring. Heavy footsteps descended, each one deliberate, controlled, predatory. And then he was there, standing at the bottom of the stairs, and Elena forgot how to breathe. He was enormous, well over 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span the width of the narrow staircase. His eyes burned like molten gold in the darkness, fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to crawl out of her skin. "Impossible," he breathed, his voice like gravel and honey. "You're here. You're actually here." Elena stared at him, at this stranger who looked at her like she was something precious, something sacred, something worth breaking down doors for. "Who?" Her voice cracked. "Who are you?" He moved toward her with speed that shouldn't have been possible for someone his size, dropping to his knees in front of her. His hands, large and scarred and trembling, reached for her face, cupping it with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "My name is Robert Madden," he said, his golden eyes searching hers with desperate intensity. "I'm the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. And you," his voice broke, and Elena saw tears gathering in those impossible eyes. "You're my mate, my true mate. I've been searching for you for 10 years. The world tilted. Above them, she could hear shouting. Javier's voice, raised in anger and alarm. "That's the Omega. She's nothing. She's..." Robert's head snapped up, and the growl that tore from his chest made the entire foundation shake. His eyes had gone full wolf, burning with a fury that promised violence. "If anyone," he said, his voice carrying up the stairs with lethal clarity, "refers to my mate as nothing again, I will rip out their throat and feed it to them." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. She was hallucinating, dying, finally losing her mind after months of darkness and chains, and Robert turned back to her, and his expression softened instantly. "The chains," he growled, looking at the silver restraints with murder in his eyes. "Who did this to you?" "It doesn't matter," Elena whispered. "It doesn't. It matters to me." He gripped the chains with his bare hands, heedless of the way silver burned his skin, and yanked them apart like they were made of paper. The metal screamed and snapped, and suddenly Elena was free, falling forward into arms that caught her like she weighed nothing at all. Robert held her against his chest, his heart thundering beneath her ear, one hand cradling her head while the other wrapped around her waist. He buried his face in her filthy, matted hair, and breathed her in like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. "I've got you," he murmured, his voice raw with emotion. "I've got you, and I'm never letting go." And for the first time in 2 years, Elena let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, her mother had been right. The mate bond was sacred, unbreakable, worth waiting for. Chapter 2. A King's Fury. Robert Madden carried Elena up the stairs like she was made of glass and starlight. Every step was measured, controlled, despite the rage that radiated from him in waves so thick Elena could taste it on her tongue, metallic and hot, like blood and fire. His arms never loosened around her. If anything, they tightened, as though he feared someone might try to tear her away. When they emerged into the great hall, the celebration had transformed into chaos. Pack members pressed against the walls, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Warriors had shifted into defensive positions, half transformed, claws extended and teeth bared. And in the center of it all stood Javier Ingram, his face twisted with fury and something else, something that looked almost like panic. Beside him, draped in white silk and diamonds, stood Janelle Bright. Her beauty was exactly as Chris had described, otherworldly, devastating. Golden hair cascaded down her back in perfect waves. Her blue eyes sparkled with intelligence and barely concealed ambition. She looked like a Luna, like a queen. But she wasn't looking at Javier. She was staring at Robert with naked hunger, her lips parted slightly, her chest rising and falling rapidly beneath her elaborate gown. "Alpha King," Javier said, his voice strained with false courtesy. "This is unexpected. We didn't receive word of your visit to our territory." Robert's eyes, still burning with that terrible golden light, swept across the assembled pack with cold assessment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority, the kind of power that made even alphas bow their heads. "I don't require permission to enter territories within my domain, Alpha Ingram. Or have you forgotten that Shadowmere falls under my jurisdiction?" A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Javier's jaw clenched. "Of course not, Your Majesty. We are honored by your presence. But I must ask why you've taken our Omega." "Your Omega?" Robert's laugh was devoid of humor. It was the kind of sound that preceded bloodshed. "You chain your pack members in basements like animals, and call them yours?" "She's a liar," Janelle interjected, her voice smooth as honey, calculated as a blade between ribs. "She's been claiming for months that she's Javier's mate, trying to interfere with our bond. We had to restrain her for her own protection. She's unstable." Elena felt Robert's chest rumble with a growl so deep it made her bones vibrate. His grip on her shifted, one arm hooking beneath her knees while the other supported her back, holding her against him like a shield. "My mate," Robert said, each word pronounced with deadly precision, "bears the marks of silver poisoning. Her wrists are burned to the bone. She's malnourished, dehydrated, and judging by the scars on her back, she's been beaten regularly for months, possibly years." His eyes found Javier's, and Elena had never seen such concentrated hatred. "Tell me again how you were protecting her." The silence that followed was suffocating. Javier's face had gone pale. "Your Majesty, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "I can smell the mate bond," Robert interrupted, his voice dropping to something quiet and infinitely more dangerous. Faint, damaged, barely alive, but it's there. Between her and you. He paused, letting that truth settle over the room like ash. You rejected your fated mate. You chained her in your basement while you prepared to choose another. And you want to talk to me about misunderstandings? Elder Hubert Phillips stepped forward, his weathered face arranged in lines of righteous indignation. The girl is an Omega, Your Majesty. Surely you understand that an Alpha of Javier's standing cannot be bound to such weakness. It would compromise the entire Pax. Finish that sentence, Robert said softly, and I will remove your tongue. Hubert's mouth snapped shut. Robert's gaze swept the room one final time, and when he spoke, it was with the voice of a king delivering judgment. Shadowmere Pack, hear my decree. As of this moment, you are under formal investigation for abuse and violation of sacred mate bonds. I will be conducting interviews with every pack member. Any who have participated in the imprisonment or abuse of my mate will face consequences under Northern Territory law. He paused. And Alpha Ingram? Consider your title under review. An Alpha who cannot protect the weakest members of his pack has no business leading anyone. You can't. Javier started, his wolf rising in his eyes, dominance pouring off him in waves. It was nothing compared to Robert's power. The Alpha King's aura exploded outward like a nuclear blast, forcing every wolf in the room to their knees. Elena felt it wash over her, should have felt it force her down too, but somehow Robert's power curved around her, protecting her, keeping her safe in the eye of his storm. I am the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, Robert said, his voice resonating with primal authority that came from bloodlines older than memory. I command over 300 packs. I have killed rogues with my bare hands and ended wars with a word. Do not presume to tell me what I can and cannot do. Even Javier had been forced to one knee, his head bowed, his body trembling with the effort of not submitting completely. Janelle knelt beside him, her perfect face arranged in lines of fear and grudging respect. But her eyes, when they flickered up to Robert again, still held that calculating hunger. Robert turned without another word and carried Elena toward the Great Hall's entrance. The crowd parted before him like water, pack members pressing themselves against the walls to avoid even the possibility of blocking his path. Wait, a small voice called out. Chris Gay pushed through the crowd, her blue dress rumpled now, her face streaked with tears. She ran to Robert's side, looking up at him with desperate hope. You're really taking her away? You're really going to protect her? Robert's expression softened fractionally as he looked down at the child. What's your name, little one? Chris Gay, Your Majesty. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. Elena is my friend. My only friend. Everyone else says I shouldn't talk to her, but she's never been mean to me, not once, and she doesn't deserve what they did to her. She doesn't. Chris, Elena whispered, her heart breaking at the tears streaming down the girl's face. It's okay. I'm okay now. You showed her kindness when no one else would, Robert said to Chris, and his voice held a gentleness Elena wouldn't have thought possible from someone so powerful. That took courage. Real courage. Your pack should be proud of you. Chris's face crumpled. They're not. Mama says I'm too soft, that I'll never be strong enough to be a real wolf. Robert crouched down, careful to keep Elena secure in his arms, until he was eye level with the trembling child. Being strong doesn't mean being cruel, Chris Gay. The strongest wolves I know are the ones who protect those who cannot protect themselves. You did that for my mate when I couldn't. That makes you stronger than half the warriors in this room. He reached into his jacket with one hand and pulled out a small silver medallion on a chain. It bore the insignia of the Northern Territories, a wolf crowned with stars. This is my personal seal, Robert said, pressing it into Chris's small hand. If you ever need help, if anyone ever hurts you or makes you feel like you're not enough, you send this to the Northern Palace. My beta will see it, and he'll come for you. You'll have a place with us, if you want it, a real home. Chris stared at the medallion like it was made of sunlight and impossible dreams. Really? I never lie, little one, especially not to brave wolves who deserve better than they've been given. Fresh tears spilled down Chris's cheeks, but this time they looked like relief, like hope. She clutched the medallion to her chest and nodded, unable to speak. Robert stood and continued toward the exit. His warriors Elena hadn't even noticed them entering, forming a protective circle around them. There had to be at least 20 of them, all massive, all radiating the kind of lethal competence that came from years of battle and blood. As they passed through the doorway, Elena heard Janelle's voice, pitched perfectly to Carrie. "It's a shame, really. All this drama over an Omega, who'll probably die within the year anyway. They're so fragile, aren't they?" Robert stopped walking. Elena felt the temperature drop by what had to be 10 degrees. Ice literally began forming on the doorframe beside them, frost spreading across the wood in fractal patterns. "Beta," Robert said quietly. One of the warriors, a man with silver-shot black hair and eyes like frozen lakes, stepped forward. "Yes, Alpha King? Lady Bright just wished death upon my mate. I want you to remember that." The Beta's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Already committed to memory, Alpha King." Robert continued walking, but Elena caught one last glimpse of Janelle's face over his shoulder. The beautiful blonde had gone sheet white, finally understanding that she'd made a terrible, potentially fatal mistake. They emerged into the cool night air, and Elena gasped as she breathed in her first lungful of fresh air in 3 months. The moon hung fat and heavy in the sky, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. The forest stretched out before them, ancient and wild, and suddenly, impossibly, full of promise. A convoy of black vehicles waited in the clearing, sleek SUVs with darkened windows that screamed wealth and power. Robert carried Elena to the largest one, and someone, a female warrior with kind eyes, opened the back door for them. Robert climbed in carefully, settling Elena in his lap, arranging her against his chest like she belonged there, like this was where she'd always meant to be. "How far to the nearest hospital?" Robert asked the driver. 20 minutes, Alpha King." 10. Robert corrected. "And tell the healers I'm bringing a mate who's been systematically abused. Silver poisoning, malnutrition, possible internal injuries. They're to have a private suite ready with everything she needs." "Yes, Alpha King." The vehicle started moving, the convoy falling in around them, and Elena felt the reality of what was happening crash over her like a wave. She was leaving Shadowmere. Leaving the only home she'd ever known. Leaving Javier and the pack and the basement that had been her prison for 3 months. She should have felt relieved, grateful. Instead, she felt terrified. "Hey," Robert murmured, his hand coming up to cup her face, tilting it so she had to meet his eyes. "Talk to me. What are you thinking?" "I don't understand," Elena whispered. "Why me? I'm nothing. I'm an Omega. I'm broken and used and—" "Stop." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, catching a tear she hadn't realized was falling. "You are my mate, my true mate, fated by the moon goddess herself. You are the other half of my soul, Elena. And I have been looking for you since the day I turned 18 and felt the first phantom pull of our bond." 10 years, Elena breathed. "You've been searching for 10 years?" 10 years, he confirmed. "I've traveled to every pack in my territory, met thousands of wolves, hoping, praying that I'd find you. And tonight, when we were passing through this region, on our way to a council meeting, I caught your scent on the wind." His voice roughened with emotion. "I've never shifted so fast in my life. My wolf took over completely. All I could think was find her, protect her, never let go." Elena's breath hitched. "But I'm nobody. You're the Alpha King. You could have anyone." "I don't want anyone," Robert said fiercely. "I want you, exactly as you are. And I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that you were worth every moment of that 10-year search." The vehicle sped through the night, carrying Elena away from her past and toward a future she'd never dared imagine. And for the first time in her life, she let herself hope. Chapter 3. Broken Wings and Healing Hands. The hospital was nothing like Elena expected. She'd imagined cold fluorescent lights and sterile white walls, the impersonal efficiency of pack healers who saw patients as problems to solve rather than people to care for. Instead, Robert carried her into a private wing that looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical facility. Warm wood paneling, soft lighting that didn't hurt her eyes, and the gentle scent of lavender and chamomile drifting through the air. "This is the Northern Territory's Royal Medical Center," Robert explained as he carried her down a quiet hallway. "It was built specifically for pack members who've suffered trauma. Everything here is designed to heal not just the body, but the spirit." Elena wanted to respond, wanted to say something intelligent or grateful, but exhaustion had settled into her bones like lead. The adrenaline that had kept her functioning during the confrontation at Shadowmere had burned away, leaving her hollow and trembling. Robert seemed to sense this. He held her closer, his warmth seeping into her frozen limbs. "Almost there, sweetheart. Just hold on a little longer. Sweetheart." The endearment made her chest ache. They entered a suite at the end of the hall, and Elena's breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a moonlit garden. A massive bed dominated one wall, piled high with pillows and blankets that looked impossibly soft. And standing beside a medical cart, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, was an elderly woman whose warm brown eyes held nothing but compassion. "Your Majesty," the woman said, bowing her head slightly. "I'm healer Pam Farmer. I'll be overseeing Elena's care personally." "Thank you for preparing on such short notice," Robert said, carrying Elena to the bed and setting her down with excruciating gentleness. He immediately took up position beside her, one hand finding hers, their fingers interlacing like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Pam approached slowly, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Elena, dear, I need to examine you. Is it all right if I take a look at those wrist injuries first?" Elena nodded mutely, extending her arms. The silver burns had stopped actively bleeding, but the skin was raw and weeping, the flesh beneath an angry red that spoke of deep tissue damage. Pam's expression tightened with barely suppressed anger as she examined the wounds. "Silver chains. For how long?" "3 months, Elena whispered. They didn't take them off. Not once." Robert made a sound low in his chest that was more animal than human. Elena felt his hand tighten around hers, not painfully, but protectively, like he was anchoring himself through the touch. 3 months of constant silver exposure, Pam said quietly, pulling out various supplies from her cart. "That should have killed you. The fact that you survived." She met Elena's eyes with something like awe. "You're much stronger than you know, child." "I'm an Omega," Elena said automatically, repeating the words that had been drilled into her for years. "We're the weakest. You're a wolf who survived 3 months of torture that would have killed most alphas within a week," Pam interrupted gently but firmly. "Omega, Alpha, Beta, those are just classifications. They don't define your worth or your strength." Elena didn't know how to respond to that. The words felt foreign, impossible, like a language she'd never learned to speak. Pam began cleaning the wounds with a solution that smelled of herbs and something else, something that made Elena's wolf stir with interest. "This is going to sting, I'm afraid. But it will help prevent infection and accelerate healing." She was right. It burned like liquid fire, and Elena couldn't quite suppress the whimper that escaped her throat. Robert was there instantly, his free hand coming up to cup her face. "Look at me," he commanded softly. "Just look at me, Elena. Breathe with me." She met his golden eyes, those impossible, beautiful eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul, and found herself matching her breathing to his. In and out, slow and steady. The pain didn't disappear, but it became manageable, distant, something happening to her body rather than consuming her entirely. "Good," Robert murmured. "That's so good, sweetheart. You're doing perfectly." Pam worked quickly and efficiently, cleaning and bandaging both wrists before moving on to check Elena's other injuries. There were more than Elena had realized: bruises in various stages of healing. Covered her ribs and back. Old scars from previous beatings. Signs of malnutrition that went back months, possibly years. "I'm going to need to do a full physical examination," Pam said carefully. "But not tonight. Tonight, we focus on the immediate concerns: hydration, nutrition, pain management, and rest. The deeper healing can wait until you've had time to recover some strength." She hooked up an IV, something clear that she explained was a mixture of fluids, vitamins, and a mild sedative to help Elena sleep. Then she produced a small cup of broth, steam rising from the surface. "Just a few sips," Pam instructed. "Your stomach needs to adjust gradually. Too much too fast will make you sick." Elena took the cup with shaking hands and sipped carefully. The broth was rich and flavorful chicken and herbs, warm and comforting in a way that made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She'd almost forgotten what real food tasted like. "How long since you ate last?" Robert asked, his voice carefully neutral in a way that suggested he was fighting to keep his rage contained. "Chris brought me bread this morning," Elena said. Yesterday's bread. And some water. Before that, Elena tried to remember. Time had blurred in the basement, days bleeding into each other in an endless cycle of darkness and pain. 3 days? Maybe 4? Robert closed his eyes, his jaw clenching so hard Elena could hear his teeth grind together. When he opened them again, they'd gone full wolf, burning gold with vertical slits for pupils. "Robert," she whispered, not knowing why she felt compelled to comfort him when she was the one who'd suffered. "I'm okay. I'm here now. I'm safe. You should never have been in danger in the first place," he said roughly. "You should have been protected, cherished, treated like the precious gift you are. Instead they—" His voice broke. "I should have found you sooner. You found me exactly when you were meant to," Elena said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Maybe I had to go through all of that to end up here, with you." Robert brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles carefully, avoiding the bandaged wrists with a reverence that made her chest ache. "You're extraordinary," he breathed. "After everything they did to you, you're comforting me." Pam cleared her throat gently. "Your Majesty, I need to ask a difficult question." Robert's attention snapped to the healer. "Ask." "The mate bond. I can feel it, both bonds actually. The damaged one with Alpha Ingram and the new one forming with you. That's unprecedented. I've never heard of a wolf having 2 mate bonds simultaneously." "Is it dangerous?" Robert demanded immediately. "Will it hurt her?" "I don't know," Pam admitted. "Theoretically, when a mate bond is rejected, it should sever completely. But Elena's bond with Alpha Ingram is still there, barely alive but present. It's possible that because he never formally rejected her, never spoke the words of severance in front of witnesses, the bond couldn't fully die." Elena felt ice slide down her spine. "What does that mean?" "It means," Pam said carefully, "that you're caught between 2 bonds, one old and damaged, one new and growing. Eventually, one will have to give way to the other. Either the old bond will finally sever, or—" She trailed off. "Or what?" Robert pressed, his voice dangerous. "Or the new bond will fail to form completely, unable to overwrite the existing connection." Pam looked genuinely apologetic. "I'm sorry. I wish I had better answers. This is uncharted territory." Elena felt panic rising in her chest. After everything, after being found, rescued, promised safety, was she going to lose Robert too? Was the universe really that cruel? "No," Robert said firmly, as if reading her thoughts. "That's not going to happen. I don't care what the precedent is or isn't. Elena is my mate. I felt it the moment I caught her scent. My wolf recognized her. Nothing, not a damaged bond. Not pack politics. Not the moon goddess herself is taking her from me." He stood abruptly, running a hand through his dark hair in frustration. "There has to be a solution. Some way to sever the old bond completely." "There is," Pam said quietly. "Alpha Ingram would need to perform a formal rejection. In front of his pack, he would have to speak the words of severance and mean them. That would break the bond cleanly. Then I'll make him do it," Robert said, his tone brooking no argument. "You can't force a rejection, Your Majesty. It has to be done willingly, or it won't take." Robert's laugh was bitter. "Trust me, healer farmer. By the time I'm done with Javier Ingram, he'll be begging for the chance to sever any connection to Elena. I'll make him see it as the gift it is being freed from a bond with someone far too good for him." Elena should have felt vindicated by the promise of vengeance in Robert's voice. Should have felt satisfied that Javier would finally face consequences for what he'd done. Instead, she just felt tired. So impossibly tired. The sedative in the IV was starting to take effect, making her limbs heavy and her thoughts slow and syrupy. Her eyelids drooped despite her best efforts to stay awake. "Sleep, sweetheart," Robert murmured, returning to her side. He brushed a strand of matted hair from her face with infinite gentleness. "I'll be right here. I'm not going anywhere. Promise?" Elena whispered, hating how small and desperate she sounded. "I promise. On my life, on my title, on everything I am, I will never abandon you." Elena wanted to believe him. Wanted it so badly it hurt. But trust was a muscle she'd forgotten how to use, and promises were things that people broke when it suited them. Still, as sleep pulled her under, She let herself imagine just for a moment that this was real, that she was safe, that someone actually wanted her, that maybe, just maybe, her mother had been right all along. The last thing she felt before consciousness faded was Robert's hand in hers, warm and solid and real, anchoring her to a world that had finally decided she deserved to stay. Meanwhile, back at Shadowmere, Javier Ingram stood in his private chambers, his hands braced against the windowsill, watching the taillights of the Alpha King's convoy disappear into the night. "Well," Janelle said, from where she'd arranged herself artfully on his bed, still wearing her white ceremonial gown. "That was dramatic." Javier whirled on her, fury blazing in his eyes. "Dramatic? The Alpha King just put our entire pack under investigation. He called my leadership into question. His voice broke. He took her." Janelle's perfect face remained serene, unbothered. "He took the Omega. The same Omega who's been nothing but a liability since her mother died. If anything, Robert Madden did you a favor." "She's my mate," Javier said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Was your mate," Janelle corrected. "A weak, damaged bond you were smart enough not to claim. And now she's gone, which means we can proceed with our original plan." She stood, gliding toward him with predatory grace. "You and I will complete the Luna ceremony. We'll build a powerful alliance between our packs. And in a few years, when you've proven yourself, we'll challenge Robert Madden for control of the Northern Territories." Javier stared at her, really seeing her for the first time. The ambition in her eyes, the cold calculation in her smile, the complete absence of anything resembling genuine feeling. "What have I done?" he whispered. Janelle's smile sharpened. "You've chosen strength over sentimentality, power over weakness." She placed a manicured hand on his chest. "You've chosen me." But as Javier looked into her beautiful, empty eyes, all he could see was Elena's face broken and bleeding and still somehow looking at him with something that might have been love. And for the first time in 2 years, he wondered if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Chapter 4. Wolves don't break. They transform. Elena woke to sunlight. Not the thin, gray light that occasionally filtered through the basement's single grimy window, but real sunlight, warm and golden and streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows like a benediction. For several confused moments, she couldn't remember where she was. Her body felt strange, heavy and light at the same time, wrapped in softness that didn't make sense. Then memory crashed over her like a wave. The basement. Robert. The escape. The hospital. She sat up too quickly, and her head spun with vertigo. The IV had been removed at some point during the night, leaving only a small bandage in the crook of her elbow. Her wrists were still wrapped in clean white gauze, but the burning pain had dulled to a manageable ache. "Easy," a deep voice said from beside the bed. "You've been asleep for 14 hours. Your body needs time to adjust." Elena turned to find Robert sitting in a chair he'd pulled close to her bedside. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his hair mussed, his formal jacket discarded and his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He'd clearly spent the entire night watching over her. "You stayed," she breathed. "I told you I would." His golden eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced. "How are you feeling?" Elena took inventory. Her body hurt. Everything hurt. Really, but it was different from the grinding, hopeless pain of the basement. This pain felt like healing, like her body was finally being allowed to repair itself. "Better," she said honestly. "Sore, but better." A knock at the door interrupted them. Pam Farmer entered carrying a tray that made Elena's stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. Eggs, toast, fresh fruit, and what looked like herbal tea, all arranged beautifully on delicate china. "Good morning, dear," Pam said warmly. "I thought you might be ready for something more substantial than broth. But we'll still take it slow, small portions, easy to digest." Elena stared at the food like it might disappear if she blinked. "This is all for me? All for you," Pam confirmed, setting the tray on the bedside table. "And there's more in the kitchen if you're still hungry after. We need to rebuild your strength." Elena picked up a fork with trembling hands and took a bite of eggs. They were perfectly cooked, fluffy, and seasoned with herbs she couldn't identify, and tasted like heaven. She had to fight the urge to shovel everything into her mouth at once, to eat like the starving animal she'd become. Robert seemed to sense her struggle. "Take your time," he said gently. "It's not going anywhere. No one's going to take it from you." Those words, "no one's going to take it from you," made something crack open in Elena's chest. She set down the fork and pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold back the tears that suddenly threatened to overwhelm her. Hey, Robert murmured, moving from the chair to sit on the edge of the bed. His large hand settled on her back, rubbing slow circles. "What's wrong? Is the food not good? We can get you something else." "It's perfect," Elena choked out. "That's the problem. It's all perfect. You're perfect. And I keep waiting for it to disappear. For you to realize that you made a mistake, that I'm not worth." "Stop," Robert said firmly. His hand came up to cup her chin, tilting her face toward his. "Look at me, Elena. Really look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes through the blur of tears. "I am the Alpha King of the Northern Territories," Robert said, his voice steady and sure. "I have never made a decision lightly. When I choose something, when I commit to someone, I don't waver. I don't change my mind. I don't give up." His thumb brushed away a tear from her cheek. "You are my mate. My true mate. And I will spend every day for the rest of our lives proving to you that you're worth more than you've been taught to believe." "But I don't understand why," Elena whispered. "Why me? I'm broken, used, damaged." "You're a survivor," Robert interrupted. "You endured 3 months of torture that should have killed you. You maintained your kindness. I saw how you were with that little girl. Chris. You could have been bitter, angry, vengeful. Instead, you comforted her, protected her innocence even while you were suffering." His eyes blazed with conviction. "That's not weakness, Elena. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen." Elena wanted to believe him. Wanted it so desperately that it scared her. Pam cleared her throat gently. "I'll give you two some privacy. But Elena, please eat. You need the nutrients." She paused at the door. "Oh, and Your Majesty? Your beta is waiting in the hall. He says it's urgent." Robert's expression darkened. "Tell him I'll be out in a moment." After Pam left, Robert turned back to Elena. "I need to handle some pack business, but I won't be gone long, an hour at most. Will you be all right?" Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. "If you need anything at all, there's a button on the bedside table. Press it, and a healer will come immediately. And my beta, Christopher Hodge, will be stationed right outside your door. No one gets in without going through him first." "You're assigning me a bodyguard?" Elena asked, surprised. "I'm ensuring that my mate is protected while I can't be physically present," Robert corrected. His hand found hers, fingers interlacing. "Elena, I need you to understand something. What happened at Shadowmere, the abuse, the chains, the cruelty, that will never happen again. Not while I'm alive. You're under my protection now. Under the protection of the crown. Anyone who tries to hurt you will answer to me personally." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Elena's wolf purr with contentment. She'd never had anyone fight for her before. Never had anyone look at her like she was something precious worth defending. "Okay," she whispered. Robert leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, the first kiss he'd given her, chaste and sweet, and somehow more intimate than anything she'd experienced. "Eat your breakfast, rest, and I'll be back before you know it." He stood and walked to the door, but paused with his hand on the handle. "Elena?" "Yes? Thank you for surviving long enough for me to find you. The world is better with you in it." Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone with her breakfast, and a heart that felt too big for her chest. In the hallway, Robert closed the door to Elena's room with careful control, then let his mask slip. Rage pure. Incandescent rage blazed through him like wildfire. His hands trembled with the effort of containing his wolf, who wanted nothing more than to shift and tear apart everyone who'd laid a hand on their mate. Christopher Hodge stood at attention, his silver-shot hair gleaming in the fluorescent lights. He was Robert's oldest friend, his most trusted advisor, and one of the few people who could read his moods perfectly. "That bad?" Christopher asked quietly. "Worse," Robert growled. 3 months, Chris. They kept her chained in a basement for 3 months. Silver chains that never came off. She's malnourished, covered in scars, and so broken she can't comprehend why anyone would want her." His voice dropped to something deadly. I want a full investigation. Every pack member interviewed. I want to know everyone who knew about her imprisonment and did nothing. Everyone who participated, even passively. Already started, Christopher confirmed. I sent a team back to Shadowmere last night. They're conducting interviews as we speak. He hesitated. Robert, there's something else. Something you need to see. He held out a tablet. On the screen was a series of photographs, pack records from Shadowmere dating back years. Christopher swiped through them, and Robert felt his blood turn to ice. Elena at 16, her face bruised and split lip visible even in the official pack photo. Elena at 17, her arm in a makeshift sling, her eyes hollow. Elena at 18, the year she would have felt the mate bond snap into place with burn marks visible on her neck and wrists. They've been abusing her for years, Christopher said quietly. Long before the basement. The pack physician's records show repeated treatments for training accidents and disciplinary measures. But Elena never filed a single complaint. Never told anyone what was happening. Because she thought she deserved it, Robert said, his voice raw. Because they convinced her that she was worthless, that being an Omega made her less than nothing. There's more. Christopher swiped to a different file. Financial records show that Elena worked for the pack healing, teaching the young wolves, maintaining the community gardens. But she was never paid. Not a single coin in 20 years. They enslaved her, Robert said flatly. Essentially, yes. And according to multiple witnesses we've already interviewed, Alpha Ingram knew about the abuse. He witnessed it personally on several occasions and did nothing to stop it. Robert's wolf snarled inside his chest, demanding blood. What about the stepmother, the one who ordered the chains? Tamara Wise. She's Alpha Ingram's aunt, appointed as Elena's guardian after her mother died. She's also the one who's been organizing most of the disciplinary sessions. Christopher's jaw clenched. The woman is a sadist, Robert. Some of the things the witnesses described. I want her arrested, Robert said immediately. Formal charges under Northern Territory law. Abuse of a pack member. Unlawful imprisonment. Torture. I want her in chains, the same silver chains she used on Elena, and I want her to stand trial. Already in custody, Christopher confirmed. She tried to run when our team showed up. Made it about 5 miles into the forest before my wolves caught her. Good. Robert pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to contain the headache building behind his eyes. What about Ingram? What's his status? Cooperative. Suspiciously so. Christopher's expression darkened. He's claiming he didn't know about the extent of the abuse. Says his aunt handled Elena's care and he trusted her judgment. He's also claiming that Elena's accusations of a mate bond were delusional, that he never felt any connection to her. He's lying, Robert said flatly. I smelled the bond. Damaged, dying, but present. He felt it and rejected it. I believe you. But proving it might be difficult. If Ingram maintains that the bond never existed, if he never formally acknowledged it. Christopher trailed off meaningfully. Robert understood the implication. Without Ingram's acknowledgement, without a formal rejection ceremony, the bond would continue to exist in its current damaged state, unable to fully die, unable to heal, trapped in limbo. And as long as that bond existed, Robert's own bond with Elena would struggle to form completely. Then we make him acknowledge it, Robert said, his voice hard as steel. I don't care what it takes. Javier Ingram will face the truth of what he's done, and he will formally sever the bond. I will not let his cowardice continue to hurt Elena. And if he refuses? Robert's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Then I'll make him wish he hadn't. A scream shattered the quiet conversation, high and terrified and coming from Elena's room. Robert didn't remember moving. One moment he was in the hallway. The next he'd burst through the door, his wolf surging to the surface, ready to destroy whatever threatened his mate. Elena sat bolt upright in bed, her eyes wild with panic, her chest heaving with panicked breaths. Her breakfast tray lay shattered on the floor, food and broken china scattered across the polished wood. Elena, Robert said, forcing his voice to remain calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Elena, sweetheart, what's wrong? She looked at him, but her eyes were unfocused, seeing something that wasn't there. He's coming, she gasped. He's coming for me. He's going to take me back to the basement. No one is taking you anywhere, Robert said firmly, approaching slowly with his hands visible, non-threatening. You're safe. You're in the hospital. You're under my protection. You don't understand, Elena said, tears streaming down her face. Javier always finds me. Every time I try to escape, every time I think I'm free, he finds me and drags me back, and it's worse, it's always worse. Robert's heart shattered. You tried to escape before? Elena nodded jerkily. 3 times. The first time I was 15. I made it to the border before his wolves caught me. He dragged me back by my hair. And her voice broke. The basement was mercy compared to what came before. Robert moved to the bed and carefully gathered Elena into his arms. She fought him at first, still trapped in the nightmare of memory, but he held firm, rocking her gently and murmuring reassurances into her hair. I've got you, he whispered. I've got you, and I'm never letting go. Javier Ingram will never touch you again. I swear it on everything I am. Gradually, Elena's panic subsided. Her breathing evened out. She sagged against Robert's chest, exhausted from the emotional storm. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. The breakfast was so nice, and I ruined it. You have nothing to apologize for, Robert said firmly. Nothing. Do you understand me? You had a panic attack. That's a normal response to trauma. You didn't do anything wrong. Elena buried her face in his shirt and cried deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very core of her being. And Robert held her through it all, his own tears sliding silently down his face, as he mourned for the girl who'd tried to escape 3 times and been punished for wanting to be free. He made a silent vow in that moment. Javier Ingram would pay for every tear, every scar, every moment of terror he'd inflicted on Elena. And Robert would make sure the payment was steep. Chapter 5. The Reckoning Begins. 3 days passed in a blur of healing and small victories. Elena learned to eat without fear that the food would be taken away. She learned to sleep without startling awake at every sound. Comforted by Robert's presence, he'd moved a cot into her room and refused to leave despite her protests that an alpha king shouldn't sleep on a glorified camping bed. She learned to accept gentle touches without flinching, to believe that hands could heal instead of hurt. But she also learned that healing wasn't linear. On the morning of the 4th day, Pam declared Elena well enough to leave the hospital wing. You'll still need regular check-ins, the healer said, applying fresh bandages to Elena's nearly healed wrists. And you're not cleared for any strenuous activity. But physically, you're out of immediate danger. What about mentally? Elena asked quietly. Pam's expression softened. Trauma doesn't heal on the same timeline as flesh, dear. You'll have good days and bad days, triggers you don't expect, memories that ambush you at inconvenient moments. She squeezed Elena's hand gently. But you're stronger than you think, and you have people who want to help you heal. Robert appeared in the doorway, as if summoned by the conversation. He'd showered and changed into fresh clothes, dark jeans, and a simple black shirt that somehow made him look even more imposing than his formal attire. His hair was still damp, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. Ready? He asked Elena, extending his hand. Elena stared at that offered hand, large, scarred from battles she could only imagine, steady and sure. A hand that had held her through nightmares, that had fed her when she was too weak to feed herself, that had never once been raised against her in anger. She took it. Robert's fingers closed around hers, warm and solid, and he smiled, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his golden eyes and made him look younger, less burdened by the weight of leadership. Where are we going? Elena asked, as Robert led her out of the hospital wing and into a covered walkway that connected to another building. The Northern Palace, Robert said. My home. Our home. If you'll have it, our home. The words made Elena's chest tight with emotion she couldn't name. They emerged from the walkway into a courtyard that stole Elena's breath. A garden stretched before them, lush and wild and beautiful in a way that seemed impossible. Ancient trees provided shade over winding paths. Flowers she couldn't identify bloomed in riotous colors. A fountain bubbled in the center, the water crystal clear and musical. It's beautiful, Elena breathed. It was my mother's, Robert said softly. She designed it before she died. Said every palace needed a heart, and hers was green and growing. He looked down at Elena, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. I thought you might like to see it. Before we go inside, they walked the paths together, Robert pointing out different plants, and telling stories about his mother, how she'd insisted on getting her hands dirty despite the palace staff's horror, how she'd taught him to identify healing herbs when he was barely old enough to walk, how she'd filled every room with fresh flowers until the entire palace smelled like spring. She sounds wonderful, Elena said wistfully. I wish I could have met her. She would have loved you, Robert said with absolute certainty. She always said that strength came in unexpected forms, that the quietest wolves often had the loudest hearts. They paused beside the fountain, and Elena caught sight of her reflection in the water. She barely recognized herself. Pam had helped her bathe and brush out her matted hair. The hospital had provided clean clothes, soft leggings, and an oversized sweater that probably belonged to Robert, judging by the way it smelled like him. The silver burns on her wrists were healing, the angry red fading to pink. She looked human, almost. Elena, Robert said, turning to face her fully. His expression had gone serious, the playful lightness from moments ago replaced by something heavier. Before we go inside, there's something I need to tell you. Something you deserve to know. Dread coiled in Elena's stomach. What is it? The investigation into Shadowmere is complete. We have testimony from over 30 pack members, documented evidence of abuse spanning back 8 years, and… He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. And we have Tamara Wise in custody. She's been formally charged with torture, unlawful imprisonment, and conspiracy to harm a mate bond. Elena's knees went weak. Robert caught her immediately, steadying her against his chest. She's really arrested? Elena whispered. Javier's aunt? The woman who… She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't put into words what Tamara had done to her over the years. She can't hurt you anymore, Robert said fiercely. She'll stand trial, face consequences for what she's done. I promise you that. Elena should have felt vindicated, should have felt satisfied that her tormentor was finally facing justice. Instead, she just felt numb. What about Javier? She heard herself ask. Robert's expression darkened. That's more complicated. As Alpha of Shadowmere, he has certain legal protections. I can't arrest him without concrete proof that he directly participated in your abuse or that he knowingly allowed it to continue. He knew, Elena said flatly. He saw what they were doing to me, and he did nothing. I believe you. But legally, I need more than your word against his. I need witnesses willing to testify that he had direct knowledge. And… Robert's jaw clenched. Most of your pack is too afraid of him to speak up. Of course they were. Javier was their alpha, their leader. Going against him meant exile or worse. However, Robert continued, there is one thing I can do, one way to ensure he faces at least some consequences for his actions. What? The formal rejection. If I can force him to acknowledge the mate bond in front of witnesses and perform the severance ritual, it creates a legal record. It proves that he knew about the bond and chose to reject it, which is itself a violation of pack law when done without just cause. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. And if he refuses to acknowledge it, then I make his life very, very difficult, until he has no choice, Robert said with a dangerous smile. I control over 300 packs, Elena. Shadowmere is small, barely 200 wolves. They depend on trade agreements, territorial protections, and political alliances that I can dissolve with a word. I can make Javier understand that cooperating is in his pack's best interest. It should have bothered Elena, this casual display of power. But instead, she felt something she'd never experienced before. The heady rush of having someone powerful on her side, someone willing to fight for her. When? She asked. 3 days from now. I've called for a formal Alpha Council meeting. Every pack leader in the Northern Territories will attend, including Javier. He'll have to face you. Face what he's done. And he'll have no choice but to acknowledge the truth. Elena's breath caught. I have to see him again? Only if you want to, Robert said immediately. You don't have to attend the council meeting. You don't have to face him if you're not ready. I can handle this without you. Elena wanted to say yes. wanted to hide in Robert's palace and let him handle everything while she healed in safety. But something in her, some stubborn, broken thing that had survived years of abuse, rebelled at the idea. "No," she said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "I want to be there. I want to look him in the eye when he's forced to admit what he did." Robert studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. But the moment it becomes too much, the moment you need to leave, you tell me. No shame in protecting yourself, Elena. No shame in choosing your own well-being." They continued into the palace, and Elena's breath caught all over again. It was magnificent. Soaring ceilings with exposed wooden beams. Massive windows that let in floods of natural light. Tapestries depicting wolf pack histories covering the stone walls. And everywhere, fresh flowers and vases, just like Robert's mother had loved. "The East Wing is yours," Robert said, leading her up a grand staircase. "Private quarters, your own bathroom, a sitting room, and a balcony that overlooks the gardens. I'm in the West Wing, but," he hesitated, "if you need me during the night, if you have nightmares or just need company, I'm only a few minutes away." He pushed open a set of double doors, and Elena stepped into rooms that looked like something from a fairy tale. A massive 4-poster bed dominated the space, draped in soft fabrics in shades of cream and gold. A fireplace crackled with welcoming warmth. And through another door, she could see a bathroom with a tub large enough to swim in. "This is too much," Elena whispered. "I don't deserve." "You deserve everything," Robert interrupted firmly. "And I'm going to spend however long it takes convincing you of that." A knock at the door made them both turn. Christopher Hodge stood in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes sharp and assessing as they took in Elena. "Your Majesty," he said with a slight bow, "the witness has arrived from Shadowmere. She's waiting in your office." "Witness?" Elena asked. Robert's expression softened. "I told you people were too afraid to speak up against Javier, but there was one exception, one wolf who was brave enough to testify about what she witnessed." Elena's heart stuttered. "Who?" "Chris Gay. The little girl who brought you food. Her mother tried to stop her from coming, but she ran away from Shadowmere and showed up at our gates 2 days ago with my seal clutched in her hand." Robert's eyes shone with something that looked like pride. "She gave us a detailed account of everything she saw over the past 3 months. Every beating, every time you were denied food or water, every time Tamara went down into that basement with cruelty in her eyes." Tears blurred Elena's vision. "She's just a child. She shouldn't have had to." "She chose to," Christopher interjected quietly. "Against her family's wishes, against pack pressure. She chose to tell the truth because she said," he paused, checking notes on his tablet. "She said, Elena deserves people who stand up for her, not people who stay silent." Those were her exact words. Elena pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the magnitude of Chris's courage. That small, soft-hearted girl had risked everything to help her. "Can I see her?" Elena asked. "Please, I need to thank her." "Of course," Robert said. "Christopher, have someone escort Chris to Elena's quarters, and make sure the kitchen sends up something appropriate for a 13-year-old cookies, maybe, something sweet." Christopher nodded and departed, leaving Elena and Robert alone again. "That little girl saved your life," Robert said softly. "Without her testimony, we wouldn't have had enough evidence to arrest Tamara. Without her courage, we wouldn't have known the full extent of what was done to you." "She's braver than I ever was," Elena whispered. "She learned that bravery from somewhere," Robert countered. "From someone who showed her kindness even when they had nothing left to give. Someone who protected her innocence even while suffering." He cupped Elena's face gently. "She learned it from you." "Elena." Before Elena could respond, a small whirlwind burst into the room. "Elena," Chris cried, launching herself forward. Elena caught the girl instinctively, wrapping her arms around Chris's thin frame and holding tight. Chris sobbed into Elena's shoulder relief, and fear and love all tangled together. "I was so scared," Chris hiccuped. "I thought they killed you. I thought I'd never see you again." "I'm here," Elena murmured, stroking Chris's hair. "I'm safe. Thanks to you, sweet girl, thanks to you. Mama said I shouldn't have come. She said I betrayed the pack. But you're my friend, Elena. You're my best friend. And friends don't let friends get hurt. Elena met Robert's eyes over Chris's head. He was watching them with an expression so tender it made her chest ache, like he was seeing something precious and rare and worth protecting at all costs. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Elena let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have this, could have safety and kindness, and people who cared whether she lived or died, could have a future. You're staying here, right? Chris asked, pulling back to look at Elena with hope-filled eyes. You're not going back to Shadowmere. I'm staying, Elena confirmed, surprising herself with how easily the words came. This is my home now. Chris's smile could have lit the entire palace. Good. Because I asked the Alpha King if I could stay too. And he said yes. He said I could train with the palace wolves and go to their school and everything. Elena looked at Robert in shock. He shrugged, but his eyes were warm. I told her she could have a place here if she wanted it. Same offer I made the night I found you. Brave wolves who protect the vulnerable deserve better than they've been given. Thank you, Elena mouthed silently. Robert just smiled and left the room, giving them privacy. But his presence, his protection, remained wrapped around Elena like an invisible shield. For the first time in her life, she felt like she might actually be safe. Like she might actually be home. Meanwhile, back at Shadowmere, Javier Ingram stared at the summons on his desk. By order of Alpha King Robert Madden, your presence is required at the Northern Territory Alpha Council meeting in 3 days' time. Failure to appear will result in immediate suspension of your pack's territorial protections and trade agreements. It was elegantly worded, professionally formatted, and absolutely a threat. He's going to force the rejection, Janelle said from where she lounged in his office chair, examining her perfect manicures. He's going to make you acknowledge the bond in front of every alpha in the territory and then force you to sever it publicly. I know, Javier said tiredly. So what are you going to do? Javier looked at her. Really looked at her. At the calculated coldness in her eyes, the ambition that burned brighter than any genuine emotion. At the woman who saw him as a stepping stone to power rather than a person. Then he looked at the photograph on his desk. An old one, from years ago, before everything went wrong. Him and Elena at a pack celebration, both of them laughing at something long forgotten. She'd been 14 in that photo, still bright-eyed, still hopeful, still believing that pack meant family and family meant protection. He'd destroyed that hope methodically, year by year, until all that remained was the broken girl chained in his basement. I'm going to tell the truth, Javier said quietly. Janelle sat up straight, her eyes narrowing. What? I felt the bond. The day Elena turned 18, I felt it snap into place like a lightning strike to the chest. And I rejected it. Not formally, I didn't have the courage for that. But I rejected her in every way that mattered. I let my aunt torture her. I let the pack abuse her. I stood by and did nothing while they tried to break her spirit, because I was too much of a coward to claim an Omega as my mate. Javier, I'm going to tell the truth, he repeated, more firmly this time. I'm going to acknowledge the bond. I'm going to formally reject her, cleanly and completely, so she can be free. And then I'm going to face whatever consequences come from that. Janelle stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You'll destroy your reputation. Admitting you rejected a fated mate? The other alphas will see you as weak, dishonorable. Good, Javier said flatly. Because that's exactly what I am. He looked at Janelle one last time at the future he'd chosen over the one fate had offered him and felt nothing but regret. Elena had been right there. His mate. His other half. And he'd thrown her away like garbage because he cared more about status than soul. The moon goddess had given him a gift. And he'd spit in her face. Now it was time to pay the price. Chapter 6, Confession, Before Wolves. The day of the Alpha Council meeting arrived with cold, clear skies, and a tension that made the very air taste like copper. Elena stood in front of the mirror in her quarters, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. Over the past 3 days, she'd gained weight, not much, but enough that her cheekbones were less prominent, her collarbones less severe. Her hair had been washed and trimmed, falling in soft waves around her face. And the dress she wore, a simple but elegant gown in deep emerald green that Robert had insisted on having made for her, made her look like someone worth noticing. Like someone who mattered. You look beautiful, Chris said from where she sat on Elena's bed, swinging her legs. The girl had barely left Elena's side since arriving at the palace, following her around like a devoted shadow. I look terrified, Elena corrected, her hands trembling as she tried to fasten a delicate silver necklace, not silver that would burn, but a safe alloy that gleamed like starlight against her skin. Here, let me. Chris hopped off the bed and fastened the clasp with nimble fingers. Then she met Elena's eyes in the mirror, her young face far too serious. You don't have to do this, you know. The Alpha King said you could stay here, that you don't have to face Javier if you're not ready. I know, Elena whispered. But I need to. I need to hear him say it. Need to hear him admit what he did. Why? Chris asked with the blunt honesty of youth. Why does it matter if he admits it? You're already free. You're already safe. Why give him the power to hurt you again? Elena turned to face the girl, placing her hands on Chris's thin shoulders. Because right now, in my head, there's still a voice telling me that maybe I deserved what happened. Maybe I really was delusional. Maybe the bond was never real and I imagined the whole thing. Her voice cracked. I need to hear him say it was real, that he felt it, and rejected it. Because then I'll truly know, that what happened wasn't my fault. Understanding dawned in Chris's eyes. She threw her arms around Elena's waist and squeezed tight. It was never your fault. Never, ever, ever. A knock at the door interrupted them. Christopher Hodge stood in the doorway, dressed in formal attire that made him look even more intimidating than usual, all sharp lines and military precision. The council is assembled, he said quietly. The Alpha King requests your presence, Miss Elena. But only if you're ready. Elena took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and nodded. I'm ready. Christopher's expression softened almost imperceptibly. For what it's worth, I think you're one of the bravest wolves I've ever met, and I've known warriors who faced down armies. The compliment, unexpected and sincere, made Elena's throat tight with emotion. She followed Christopher through the winding halls of the palace, Chris trailing behind them like a protective spirit. They emerged into a massive chamber that took Elena's breath away. The council hall was enormous, a circular room with a domed ceiling painted with constellations, the moon goddess watching from the apex. Tiered seating rose in concentric circles, and seated in those tiers were dozens of alphas, all dressed in their formal pack regalia, all radiating power that made Elena's wolf whimper and cower. But at the center, on a throne carved from a single piece of black stone, sat Robert. He looked every inch the king. His formal attire was all black and silver, cut to emphasize his massive frame. A crown of twisted metal that looked like thorns and starlight rested on his head. His golden eyes swept the assembled alphas with an authority that made even the most powerful among them shift uncomfortably. When his gaze found Elena, his expression transformed, softening with such obvious affection that several alphas turned to see what had caused the change. Robert stood, and the entire chamber fell silent. My mate, he said simply, extending his hand toward her. Elena's legs felt like water, but she forced herself to walk down the central aisle. Every eye in the room tracked her movement. She could feel their assessment, their judgment, their confusion that the Alpha King's mate was an Omega, small and damaged and unimpressive by any traditional measure of wolf worth. But Robert looked at her like she was the sun and he'd been living in darkness. Elena took his hand, and he guided her to a smaller throne beside his one she hadn't noticed before, positioned at exactly the same height as his own. Aluna's throne. Sit, Robert murmured. You belong here. Elena sat, and Robert reclaimed his own throne. Only then did she allow herself to scan the assembled alphas, searching for, there. Javier Ingram sat in the third tier, his face pale and drawn, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as Elena had. Beside him sat Janelle Bright, her perfect features arranged in a mask of polite interest that didn't reach her cold blue eyes. Behind them, Elena spotted Elder Hubert, his weathered face twisted with barely concealed rage as he stared at her. This council is called to order, Robert said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the vast chamber. We gather today to address a matter of grave importance: the abuse and unlawful imprisonment of a fated mate, the systematic torture of an Omega, and the violation of sacred pack bonds. Murmurs rippled through the assembled alphas. Alpha Javier Ingram of Shadowmere Pack. Robert continued, his eyes fixing on Javier with predatory intensity. You stand accused of rejecting your fated mate without cause, of allowing systematic abuse to continue unchecked, and of imprisoning said mate in violation of Northern Territory law. How do you answer these charges? Javier stood slowly, his movements stiff. For a long moment he said nothing, his eyes fixed on Elena with an expression she couldn't read. Then he spoke, his voice hoarse. The charges are true, all of them. The chamber erupted into chaos. Alpha shouted questions, demanded explanations, argued among themselves about the implications. Janelle grabbed Javier's arm, hissing something that looked like a furious rebuke. But Javier shook her off, his attention never leaving Elena. Robert raised one hand, and silence fell immediately. You acknowledge the mate bond exists. I acknowledge it, Javier said, and Elena heard the defeat in his voice. I felt it the day Elena turned 18. A connection so strong it nearly brought me to my knees. The moon goddess chose her for me, an Omega with the heart of a warrior, brave and kind and everything I didn't deserve. His voice cracked. And I rejected her. Not formally, because I was too much of a coward to face what I'd done. But I rejected her in every way that mattered. Why? The question came from an alpha in the upper tier, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes like flint. Why would you reject a fated mate? Javier's laugh was bitter. Because I was weak. Because I cared more about what others thought than about what was right. Because being bound to an Omega felt like a liability, and I wanted power more than I wanted love. He looked at Elena directly. I let my aunt torture you. I let the pack abuse you. I stood by while they tried to break you because every moment you existed was a reminder of my own cowardice. Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she couldn't speak, couldn't move. This was what she'd needed, the acknowledgement. The validation that she hadn't imagined the bond. That her suffering had been real. But hearing it spoken aloud hurt worse than she'd expected. You imprisoned her for 3 months in a basement, Robert said, his voice dangerously soft. Silver chains that never came off. No food, no water, no medical care. Can you explain that? No, Javier said flatly. There is no explanation that makes it acceptable. My aunt convinced me it was necessary, that Elena was becoming unstable, that she was spreading lies about the mate bond. But I knew the truth. I always knew. He swallowed hard. I thought if I kept her hidden long enough, if I chose Janelle as my Luna and completed the bonding ceremony, my connection to Elena would just fade. That I could pretend it never existed. But mate bonds don't work that way. Christopher interjected from his position beside Robert's throne. They don't fade just because you ignore them. They linger. They damage both parties involved. I know that now, Javier said quietly. I know a lot of things now that I should have known then. Robert leaned forward, his golden eyes blazing. Alpha Ingram, by the laws of the Northern Territories and by the ancient codes that govern pack bonds, I hereby require you to perform a formal rejection. You will sever the mate bond cleanly and completely, freeing Elena to form a new bond with her true mate. I will, Javier said immediately, gladly. It's the least I can do. He descended from his tier and approached the center of the chamber. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as he stopped a respectful distance away, dropping to one knee in a gesture of submission that would have been unthinkable months ago. Elena Mullins, Javier said, his voice carrying through the silent chamber. I, Javier Ingram, Alpha of Shadowmere Pack, acknowledge that you are my fated mate, chosen by the moon goddess and bound to me by sacred bonds. I acknowledge that I rejected this gift through my actions and my silence. I acknowledge the pain I caused you, the suffering I allowed, the cruelty I enabled. He paused, and Elena saw tears on his cheeks. And I formally reject the mate bond between us. I sever all ties, all connections, all claims. I release you completely and irrevocably. May the moon goddess forgive me for what I threw away. Elena felt it, the bond breaking. It didn't snap like she'd expected. Instead, it unraveled slowly, strand by strand, like a rope coming undone. Each thread that broke sent a small jolt of pain through her chest, but it wasn't unbearable. It was the pain of removing a splinter that had been festering for years. And when the last thread severed, Elena gasped at the sudden lightness. The weight she'd been carrying, the constant pull toward someone who didn't want her. The ache of rejection. The confused agony of a bond that existed in limbo, all of it disappeared. She was free. Truly. Finally free. Robert was at her side instantly, his hand finding hers, squeezing gently, and Elena felt something new bloom in her chest. A different kind of bond. One that didn't hurt. One that felt like coming home after a long journey through darkness. The mate bond with Robert snapped into place fully, completely, and Elena cried out at the intensity of it. It was like being struck by lightning, like every nerve ending in her body suddenly came alive. She felt his emotions, his fierce protectiveness, his tender love, his absolute commitment. And underneath it all, she felt his wolf, ancient and powerful, wrapping around her own smaller wolf like a shield. Mine. His wolf growled through the bond. Finally, completely, irrevocably mine. Yours, Elena's wolf answered, purring with contentment for the first time in years. The assembled alphas began howling, a traditional response to the formation of a new mate bond, especially one involving the Alpha King. The sound was deafening, primal, a celebration of what the moon goddess had intended all along. But Elena only had eyes for Robert, who looked at her like she'd hung the moon and stars specifically for him. "How do you feel?" he asked softly, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Light," Elena breathed. "Like I can finally breathe." Robert pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Good, because you never have to carry that weight again." In the chaos of celebration, Elena almost missed the commotion in the upper tiers. Almost missed Janelle Bright standing abruptly, her face twisted with rage, her mouth opening to speak. "This is a farce," Janelle shouted, her voice cutting through the howls. "The Alpha King has manipulated this entire proceeding. He's forced Javier to reject his chosen mate, so he could claim an Omega for himself, an Omega who's probably already pregnant with Javier's." The temperature in the room dropped by 30 degrees in an instant. Robert stood slowly, releasing Elena's hand with obvious reluctance. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority and barely restrained violence. "Lady Bright," he said softly, each word precisely enunciated. "I would choose your next words very, very carefully." But Janelle had gone too far to back down now. "Everyone can see what this is. A power play. You wanted Shadowmere's territory. So you fabricated charges against Javier and stole his mate." "Stole?" Robert's laugh was devoid of humor. "Elena was chained in a basement. She was being systematically tortured. I didn't steal her, I rescued her from the Alpha who was supposed to protect her." "She's an Omega," Janelle spat, her beautiful face ugly with contempt. "She's worthless. The weakest link. Why would the great Alpha King want—" She never finished the sentence. Robert moved with speed that shouldn't have been possible for someone his size, crossing the distance between them in a heartbeat. He didn't touch Janelle, didn't need to. His aura exploded outward with such force that every wolf in the chamber was driven to their knees except Elena, who remained protected by the mate bond. "Let me make something absolutely clear," Robert said, his voice resonating with primal power. "Elena is my mate, my Luna, the future queen of the Northern Territories. And if anyone speaks of her with such disrespect again, I will consider it a personal challenge that ends with blood." Janelle had gone sheet white, trembling on her knees, unable to speak. "Furthermore," Robert continued, addressing the entire chamber now, "let this serve as a lesson to every pack under my jurisdiction. Omegas are not weaknesses. They are not liabilities. They are pack members deserving of the same respect, protection, and dignity as any other wolf. Any Alpha who treats them otherwise will answer to me, personally." He turned his back on Janelle, the ultimate dismissal, and returned to Elena's side, his expression softening instantly as he took her hand again. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," he murmured. Elena shook her head, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. No one had ever defended her like that. No one had ever looked at someone like Janelle Bright, beautiful, powerful, connected, and chosen Elena instead. Robert raised his voice to address the council one final time. "This meeting is concluded. Alpha Ingram, you will return to Shadowmere under probationary status. Your aunt, Tamara Wise, will stand trial in 3 weeks for her crimes, and Lady Bright—" He fixed Janelle with a look that promised consequences. Consider your PAX trade agreements under review. The alphas began filing out, some still howling their congratulations, others deep in conversation about what they'd witnessed. Javier approached the central platform one last time, stopping at a respectful distance. "Elena," he said quietly, "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know I'm sorry. For everything. You deserved so much better than what I gave you." Elena looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since entering the chamber. He looked diminished somehow. Still handsome, still powerful by most measures, but lacking something essential. The confidence, maybe. Or the certainty that he was right and good and deserving. "I hope you find someone who makes you brave instead of cowardly," Elena said finally. "Someone who makes you want to be better." Javier's smile was sad. "I already had that someone. I just wasn't strong enough to keep her." He bowed his head in respect and left without another word. Janelle followed him, shooting Elena one last venomous look before disappearing through the massive doors. And then it was just Elena and Robert, alone in the vast chamber except for Christopher, who stood at a discreet distance. "You did it," Robert said, wonder in his voice. "You faced them, faced him, and you didn't break." "I had you," Elena said simply. "I knew you wouldn't let me fall." "Never," Robert vowed, pulling her into his arms. "I will never let you fall." And as Elena stood there, wrapped in the arms of her true mate, feeling the bond pulse between them like a second heartbeat, she finally understood what her mother had meant. The mate bond was sacred, unbreakable, worth every moment of suffering it took to find. Chapter 7. Justice in the Hall of Judgment. 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparations and healing. Elena learned what it meant to be a Luna not through formal lessons or stuffy protocol training, but through Robert's patient guidance and the quiet acceptance of the palace wolves. She learned to walk through halls without keeping her eyes down. She learned to speak in council meetings without apologizing for taking up space. She learned that strength came in many forms, and hers was the kind that had survived when survival should have been impossible. But today, all that newfound confidence threatened to crumble. Today was Tamara Wise's trial. Elena stood in her quarters, staring at the formal attire, laid out on her bed a suit in deep navy blue, elegant but severe, chosen specifically to make her look older, stronger, more credible. Beside it lay a folder containing her written testimony, pages and pages detailing years of abuse that she'd forced herself to remember and document. "You don't have to testify in person," Robert said from the doorway, his eyes dark with concern. "We have your written statement. We have Chris's testimony. We have medical records and photographs and witness accounts. It's enough to convict her. But not enough to make sure she never does this again," Elena said quietly. "Not enough to show other Omegas that they can speak up, that they'll be believed." Robert crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. Over the past 3 weeks, these embraces had become as natural as breathing comfort freely given and gratefully received. "You're already the bravest person I know," he murmured into her hair. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone." "I have to prove something to myself," Elena admitted. "I have to look her in the eye and show her that she didn't break me, that I'm still here, still standing, still worth something despite everything she tried to make me believe." Robert pulled back enough to cup her face, forcing her to meet his intense golden eyes. "You are worth everything. And I will be right there with you. Every second. You won't face her alone." Elena nodded, drawing strength from the mate bond that thrummed between them steady and sure and absolutely unshakable. She dressed quickly, Robert turning away to give her privacy despite the fact that he'd already seen her scars, already knew every broken piece of her. By the time they left her quarters, Elena had transformed herself into someone who looked calm and collected, even if her insides felt like they were being torn apart. The trial was being held in the Palace Hall of Justice, a solemn room with dark wood paneling and high windows that let in cold morning light. Rows of seats were filled with witnesses, PAC members, and representatives from various territories who wanted to see justice served. And there, at the center of it all, sat Tamara Wise. Elena's breath caught at the sight of her. Javier's aunt looked diminished, somehow smaller than Elena remembered, older, with gray streaking through her dark hair and lines of bitterness etched deep around her mouth. She wore prison gray, her hands bound in front of her with silver-laced restraints that had to be burning her skin. Good, Elena thought viciously. Let her feel it. Let her know what it's like. But when Tamara's eyes found Elena, the hatred in them was undimmed. If anything, it had intensified, burning with such concentrated loathing that Elena felt her wolf whimper and cower. Robert's hand found hers immediately, his thumb stroking across her knuckles in a soothing rhythm. I've got you, he sent through the bond. She can't hurt you anymore. The presiding judge was a stern-faced woman named Carolyn Michael, known throughout the territories for her uncompromising adherence to pack law. She banged her gavel once, and the room fell silent. This tribunal is called to order, Carolyn announced. Tamara Wise, you stand accused of multiple counts of torture, unlawful imprisonment, abuse of a dependent, and conspiracy to destroy a sacred mate bond. How do you plead? Tamara's lips curled into something that might have been a smile. Not guilty. A ripple of shock moved through the assembled witnesses. Not guilty? With the mountain of evidence against her? The defendant pleads not guilty, Carolyn said, making a note. Very well. The prosecution may present its case. The next 2 hours were brutal. The prosecution, led by Christopher Hodge, who apparently had legal training in addition to his role as beta, methodically laid out the evidence. Medical records showing Elena's injuries, each one dated and documented. Photographs of the basement where she'd been kept. The silver chains still hanging from the support beam like accusatory fingers pointing at the truth. Financial records proving Elena had never been compensated for her work, essentially making her an indentured servant. And then came the witnesses. Pack members who'd heard screams coming from the basement. Warriors who'd been ordered by Tamara to discipline Elena when she stepped out of line. Even the pack physician, a nervous man named Stanley Shoemaker, who admitted under oath that he'd treated Elena for injuries that were clearly not accidental but had been too afraid of Tamara's influence to report them. Through it all, Tamara sat with an expression of serene indifference, as if this were happening to someone else entirely. Finally, Christopher called Chris Gay to the stand. The girl had grown over the past 3 weeks, not physically, but in confidence. She wore a simple dress in palace blue, and she held her head high as she took her seat in the witness box. Her mother sat in the audience, her face a mask of conflicting emotions, as she watched her daughter testify against their former pack. Miss Gay, Christopher said gently, can you tell the tribunal what you witnessed during the 3 months Elena Mullins was imprisoned in the basement? Chris's voice was steady, clear. I saw everything. I was the only one who visited her, the only one who brought her food and water, and only when I could sneak away without Mama noticing. She looked directly at Tamara. I saw you go down there. I saw you hit Elena. I saw you burn her with silver and laugh when she screamed. You told her she was worthless, that she deserved the pain, that no one would ever love something as pathetic as her. And yet you never reported this to any authority, Christopher prompted. I tried. Chris's composure cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. I told my mother. I told Elder Hubert. I even tried to tell Alpha Javier, but he said. She swallowed hard. He said Omegas sometimes needed harsh discipline, that it wasn't my concern. The audience erupted in angry murmurs. Carolyn banged her gavel for silence. Thank you, Miss Gay, Christopher said softly. No further questions. Tamara's defense attorney, a slick-looking wolf named Andy Dale, who'd probably been paid far too much for this losing battle, stood to cross-examine. Miss Gay, he said smoothly, isn't it true that you were known in Shadowmere as an imaginative child? Prone to telling stories? Objection, Christopher said immediately. Relevance? I'm establishing the witness's credibility, Your Honor. Overruled, Carolyn said reluctantly. But tread carefully, counselor. Andy smiled, the kind of smile that made Elena's skin crawl. Miss Gay, how old are you? 13. 13. And you expect this tribunal to believe that you understood the complex dynamics of adult pack politics? That you accurately interpreted what you saw? Chris's jaw set stubbornly. I know what I saw. I'm not stupid, and I'm not a liar. But you did lie, didn't you? You lied to your mother about where you were going. You lied to your pack about helping Elena. You've admitted to multiple deceptions. I lied to protect my friend, Chris shouted, her voice cracking. Because no one else would. Because everyone in Shadowmere pretended not to see what was happening so they wouldn't have to do anything about it. Miss Gay, Carolyn warned. Please control your emotions. But Chris wasn't finished. She stood up in the witness box, tears streaming down her face, and pointed directly at Tamara. You're a monster. You hurt someone who never did anything to you. Someone who was kind and gentle and good. And you did it because you liked it, because it made you feel powerful. Her voice dropped to something cold and certain. I hope you rot in prison forever. The room erupted into chaos. Carolyn banged her gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Andy looked like he regretted ever taking this case, and Tamara, for the first time since the trial began, looked genuinely shaken. The witness is excused, Carolyn said once order had been restored. And Miss Gay, while your passion is noted, please remember that this is a court of law. We maintain decorum. Chris nodded, wiping her eyes, and left the witness box. As she passed Elena's seat, their eyes met, and Elena mouthed thank you. Chris's answering smile was fierce with pride. The prosecution calls its final witness, Christopher announced. Elena Mullins. Elena's heart stopped. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading and needing in equal measure. She stood on legs that felt like water and walked to the witness box, acutely aware of every eye in the room tracking her movement. Robert's presence in her mind through the bond was a constant anchor. Breathe. You've got this. I'm right here. She sat, placed her hand on the sacred text for the oath, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Miss Mullins, Christopher said gently. Can you describe your relationship with the defendant? Elena took a deep breath. Tamara Wise became my legal guardian when I was 8 years old, after my mother died. She was not kind. From the beginning, she made it clear that I was a burden, that Omegas were worthless, that I should be grateful the pack allowed me to exist at all. And how did she treat you? She hit me. Often. For small infractions, speaking without permission, making eye contact, existing too loudly. Elena's voice remained steady, despite the trembling in her hands. When I was 12, she started withholding food as punishment. A day at first, then 2, then a week. I learned to steal from the kitchens to survive. Did you ever report this abuse? I tried, once, when I was 14. Elena's throat tightened with the memory. I went to Elder Hubert and showed him the bruises. He told me that discipline was necessary for Omegas, that I should accept correction with gratitude and humility. Christopher nodded grimly. Let's move forward to the 3 months you spent imprisoned in the basement. Can you describe what happened? Elena closed her eyes, steeling herself. It started the night I approached Javier Alpha Ingram at a pack gathering. I'd been trying to get him to acknowledge the mate bond for 2 years, but he always brushed me off. That night, I was desperate. I grabbed his arm and begged him to just talk to me. And what was his response? He looked at me like I was something disgusting he'd stepped in. He called me delusional, said the idea of being mated to that was laughable. Elena opened her eyes and found Tamara staring at her with undisguised hatred. Tamara heard the whole thing. She dragged me down to the basement that night. She said I'd embarrassed the family. Embarrassed Javier. That I needed to be taught a lesson. What kind of lesson? She chained me to the support beam with silver. She said I would stay there until I learned my place. Until I stopped spreading lies about the mate bond. Elena's voice cracked. But she kept coming back. Every few days. Sometimes to hit me. Sometimes to burn me. Sometimes just to tell me that I was worthless. That I deserved everything happening to me. That no one would ever love me. She paused, gathering her strength. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger. But she was wrong. I didn't deserve it. No one deserves that. And the fact that she convinced me I did, that was the worst abuse of all. Because even after the Alpha King rescued me, even after the chains came off, I still believed her. Part of me still believes her. The room had gone utterly silent. Thank you, Miss Mullins, Christopher said softly. No further questions. Andy Dale stood for cross-examination, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. Miss Mullins, isn't it possible that you misinterpreted disciplinary actions as abuse? That what you perceived as cruelty was actually an attempt to help you become stronger? Elena met his eyes directly. Is starvation strength training? Is burning someone with silver character development? Is telling a child she's worthless and will never be loved a teaching method? She paused. If so, then I'd hate to see what you consider actual abuse. Several people in the audience laughed despite the grim subject matter. Andy sat down, clearly recognizing a losing battle. The witness is excused, Carolyn said. Elena stood, her legs steadier now, and walked back to her seat beside Robert. He took her hand immediately, bringing it to his lips and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. You were magnificent, he sent through the bond. Asterisk, I was terrified. Asterisk, Elena admitted. You were both. That's what makes it magnificent. Carolyn reviewed her notes for several long moments before speaking. Having heard all testimony and reviewed all evidence, this tribunal finds the defendant, Tamara Wise, guilty on all counts. She banged her gavel once. The defendant is hereby sentenced to life imprisonment in the Northern Territory Maximum Security Facility, with no possibility of parole. Furthermore, she is stripped of her PAC affiliation and all associated rights and privileges. Tamara finally reacted, her face contorting with rage. This is a farce. That Omega whore seduced the Alpha King, and now she's… Bailiff, remove the prisoner, Carolyn ordered coldly. As guards dragged Tamara from the room, still screaming obscenities, Elena felt something inside her finally release. The woman who'd tormented her for 12 years, who'd convinced her she was worthless, who'd tried to break her spirit, that woman would never hurt anyone again. Justice had been served. The room erupted into conversation as people filed out. But Elena barely heard it. She was too focused on the feeling of Robert's arms around her, the mate bond singing with shared relief and triumph, and the knowledge that she'd done it. She'd faced her abuser. She'd told her truth. And she'd won. Chapter 8. Scars run deeper than flesh. The weeks following the trial should have been peaceful. Elena threw herself into learning what it meant to be Luna of the Northern Territories, sitting in on council meetings, visiting outlying packs to understand their needs, working with the palace healers to establish better medical care for vulnerable wolves. Robert was patient with her, proud of her, constantly amazed by how quickly she adapted to a role she'd never been trained for. But at night, the nightmares came. Elena would wake gasping, certain she could feel silver chains around her wrists, certain she could hear Tamara's voice telling her she was worthless. Robert was always there, pulling her close, murmuring reassurances until the panic subsided. But they both knew that healing trauma wasn't as simple as removing the source of pain. The scars ran deeper than flesh. It was Pam Farmer who finally suggested professional help. There's a healer in the Eastern Territories, she told Elena during one of their weekly check-ins. Her name is Lena Walker. She specializes in wolves who've survived prolonged trauma. She's helped hundreds of abuse survivors reclaim their lives. I don't need, Elena started automatically, then stopped herself. That was the old Elena talking, the one who'd been taught that needing help was weakness. Actually, that sounds good. Thank you. Pam's smile was warm with approval. I'll arrange a visit. She can come here, to the palace. You don't have to go anywhere that makes you uncomfortable. 2 days later, Elena found herself sitting in a comfortable room that had been converted into a private healing space. Soft furniture, warm lighting, the scent of calming herbs drifting through the air. Lena Walker was younger than Elena expected, maybe 30, with kind eyes and an easy smile that immediately put her at ease. So, Lena said, settling into a chair across from Elena. Tell me why you're here. Elena had prepared a speech, something polished and clinical about managing residual trauma responses. But what came out instead was the truth. I'm broken, she whispered. And I don't know how to fix myself. Lena didn't flinch. Didn't offer false comfort or empty platitudes. She just nodded like Elena had said something perfectly reasonable. Can I tell you something? Lena asked. About being broken? Elena nodded. Broken implies something that used to be whole, and then shattered. But you were never given the chance to be whole in the first place. You were damaged repeatedly, systematically from childhood. You didn't break, you survived being broken by people who should have protected you. Lena leaned forward slightly. So the question isn't how do we fix you? The question is, who do you want to become, now that you're finally safe enough to choose? The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Who did she want to become? She'd spent so long just trying to survive, trying to be small enough that people wouldn't notice her, trying to be useful enough that they wouldn't discard her. She'd never considered what she might want for herself. I don't know, Elena admitted. Then that's where we start, Lena said with a gentle smile. With figuring out who Elena really is, underneath all the survival mechanisms and learned behaviors. With discovering what you want, not what you think you should want. Over the following weeks, Elena met with Lena regularly. They talked about everything: the abuse, yes, but also Elena's mother, her early childhood before everything went wrong, her hopes and fears and the tiny dreams she'd tucked away because they seemed too impossible to voice. Slowly, painfully, Elena began to understand something crucial. She wasn't broken. She was wounded. And wounds, with proper care and time, could heal. Meanwhile, in Shadowmere, Javier Ingram sat alone in his office, staring at the letter that had arrived that morning. It bore the seal of the Northern Territories, Robert's personal seal, not the general royal insignia. His hands shook slightly as he broke the wax and unfolded the parchment. Alpha Ingram, by now you're aware that Tamara Wise has been sentenced to life imprisonment for her crimes against Elena. Justice has been served, at least in part. However, your role in Elena's suffering cannot be overlooked. While you did not directly participate in her abuse, your willful ignorance and passive complicity enabled it to continue. By the laws of the Northern Territories, this makes you an accessory to her crimes. I could strip you of your title. I could dissolve Shadowmere Pack and redistribute its members to other territories. The evidence supports such action, and many of my advisors have recommended it, but Elena asked me not to. Javier's breath caught. Elena had protected him, after everything. She said that destroying your pack would hurt innocent wolves who had nothing to do with her abuse. She said that while you failed her personally, you haven't failed your pack as a whole. She asked me to give you a chance to be better. So I'm offering you a choice. Option 1. You step down as Alpha voluntarily, you appoint a successor and remove yourself from leadership. Shadowmere continues under new management, and you face no further legal consequences. Option 2. You remain as Alpha, but under strict conditions. You will implement sweeping reforms to protect vulnerable pack members. You will attend mandatory leadership training focused on duty of care. You will submit to quarterly reviews conducted by my office. And you will personally apologize to every Omega in your pack for the culture of contempt you allowed to flourish. Furthermore, regardless of which option you choose, you will pay restitution to Elena, a sum equivalent to 20 years of fair wages for the work she performed for your pack without compensation. This is non-negotiable. You have 1 week to decide. Choose wisely. Robert Madden, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. Javier read the letter 3 times, then set it down with trembling hands. Elena had protected him, had advocated for his pack even after everything they'd done to her. She'd shown him more mercy than he'd ever shown her. The realization was crushing. A knock at the door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. "Come in," he called, his voice hoarse. Janelle Bright entered, beautiful as always, her expression calculating. Over the past month, the distance between them had grown. Without the mate bond to Javier as a symbol of power, Janelle's interest had waned considerably. "I'm leaving," she announced without preamble. Javier looked at her, feeling nothing but tired resignation. "Where?" "The Western Territories. Alpha Hubert Phillips has made me an offer, a marriage alliance between his pack and my family's." She examined her manicured nails. "He's older, less attractive than you, but significantly more powerful, and he doesn't have the stain of a public rejection haunting his reputation." "I see." Javier stood, crossing to the window that overlooked Shadowmere's central square. Wolves moved about their daily business, unaware that their Alpha was contemplating the biggest decision of his life. "For what it's worth, Janelle, I'm sorry. I know this wasn't what you signed up for." "No," she agreed. "I signed up for a strategic alliance with a rising Alpha. Instead, I got front row seats to your spectacular fall from grace." She paused at the door. "But for what it's worth, Javier, Elena was right for you. She made you want to be better. I just made you want to be powerful." Then she was gone, taking with her the last remnants of the future Javier had chosen over the one fate had offered. He looked down at Robert's letter again, at the choice laid out in stark black ink. Step down or stay, give up or fight to be better. For the first time in years, Javier knew exactly what he needed to do. Back at the Northern Palace, Elena stood on the balcony of her quarters, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Behind her, she could hear Robert moving through the sitting room, reviewing documents for tomorrow's council meeting. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm over the past weeks, working together during the day, sharing meals, talking long into the night about everything and nothing. But they hadn't. They still slept in separate quarters. Not because Robert didn't want her. Elena could feel his desire through the bond. A constant warmth that made her skin tingle and her heart race. But he was waiting for her to be ready. Waiting for her to choose him, not out of obligation or fear or gratitude, but out of genuine want. The problem was, Elena did want him. Desperately. But every time they got close, every time his touch lingered a fraction too long, panic would rise in her chest and she'd pull away. Tamara's voice would echo in her mind. No one will ever love you. You're worthless. Damaged goods. Elena? Robert's voice came from behind her. You're thinking very loud thoughts. Want to share? Elena turned to find him leaning against the doorframe. His shirt sleeves rolled up, his dark hair slightly mussed from running his hands through it, a habit when he was stressed. He looked so handsome it made her chest ache. Lena asked me something today, Elena said quietly. During our session. What did she ask? She asked what I wanted. Not what I thought I should want, or what would make other people happy, or what would be appropriate given my circumstances. She asked what I wanted, for myself, if nothing else mattered. Robert moved onto the balcony, standing beside her but not touching, giving her space. And what did you tell her? I didn't have an answer. I've spent so long just trying to survive that I forgot how to want things. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. But I've been thinking about it all day. And I think I know now. Tell me, Robert said softly. Elena turned to face him fully, gathering her courage. I want to stop being afraid. I want to stop hearing Tamara's voice in my head telling me I'm worthless. I want to look in the mirror and see someone strong instead of someone broken. She took a shaky breath. And I want you. Not because you're the Alpha King, or because you saved me, or because the moon goddess says we're meant to be together. I want you because you make me feel safe. Because you make me laugh. Because you look at me like I'm something precious even when I can barely stand to look at myself. Robert's eyes had gone molten gold, his wolf very close to the surface. Elena. But I'm scared, she continued, her voice breaking. I'm scared that when you really see me, when you see all the damaged, broken parts that Tamara created, you'll realize you made a mistake, that I'm not worth the effort. Robert closed the distance between them in 2 strides, cupping her face with both hands, forcing her to meet his intense gaze. Listen to me very carefully, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You are not broken, you are not damaged, you are a survivor. You are strong and brave and beautiful, and every single day, I wake up grateful that the moon goddess chose you for me. His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. I see all of you, Elena. The nightmares, the panic attacks, the moments when you can't bear to be touched. I see it all. And it doesn't make me want you less. It makes me want to spend the rest of my life showing you what love is supposed to look like. I don't know how to be loved, Elena whispered. Then let me teach you, Robert said. We'll go as slow as you need. No pressure, no expectations, just us. Learning each other. Building something real. Elena felt something crack open in her chest. Something that had been frozen and locked away for so long she'd forgotten it existed. Hope. Real, genuine hope that maybe she could have this. Could have him. Could have a future that wasn't defined by her past. Okay. She breathed. Teach me. Robert's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. He leaned forward slowly, telegraphing his intentions, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When his lips finally met hers, it was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Elena answered by rising on her toes and kissing him back, pouring everything she felt but couldn't say into the connection between them. The mate bond flared bright and hot, singing with joy at this first real, chosen intimacy. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Robert rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he whispered. I've loved you since the moment I caught your scent on the wind. And I will love you every day for the rest of our lives. I love you too, Elena said, testing the words, finding them true. I'm still scared, but I love you. Then we'll figure it out together, Robert promised. One day at a time, one moment at a time, for as long as it takes. And standing there on the balcony, wrapped in each other's arms with the sunset painting everything gold, Elena finally believed that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this happiness. That she was worth fighting for. That love could heal even the deepest wounds. 3 days later, a letter arrived at the Northern Palace, bearing the seal of Shadowmere Pack. Robert opened it in Elena's presence, both of them curious about Javier's decision. Alpha King Madden and Luna Elena, I have made my choice. I will remain as Alpha of Shadowmere, under the conditions you outlined. Furthermore, I accept full responsibility for my failures and commit to implementing the reforms necessary to ensure no wolf in my care ever suffers as Elena did. I understand this doesn't erase the past. Nothing can. But I hope, in time, to build a pack that honors the values Elena embodied even when we tried to destroy her kindness, resilience, and strength that doesn't require cruelty. The restitution payment has been prepared and will be transferred immediately. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you both to know that your mercy has given me a chance to be the Alpha I should have been from the beginning. Thank you for seeing potential in me that I couldn't see in myself. Javier Ingram, Alpha of Shadowmere Pack. Elena read the letter twice, then set it down with trembling hands. He's trying, she said softly. He's really trying to change. People can change, Robert said, pulling her close. If they want it badly enough. If they have the right motivation. Elena looked up at him. At this man who'd traveled for 10 years to find her, who'd broken down doors and challenged pack traditions and offered her not just protection but genuine love. What was your motivation, she asked, for changing from whoever you were before we met? Robert's smile was tender. That's easy. You. The idea of you. The hope that somewhere my mate was waiting for me, needing me, deserving better than loneliness. He kissed her forehead gently. Every good choice I made, every time I fought to be better, it was because I wanted to be worthy of you when I finally found you. Elena's heart felt too big for her chest. I think you succeeded. Good, Robert murmured against her hair. Because I plan to spend the rest of our lives proving it. And as they stood there together, the past finally beginning to release its grip on the present, Elena knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home, safe, loved, finally, completely free. Chapter 9, The Luna Ceremony. The announcement went out across all Northern Territories 3 weeks later. The Alpha King would formally claim his Luna in a traditional bonding ceremony open to all pack members who wished to attend. Elena's stomach had been in knots ever since. You don't have to do this, Robert said for the 1000th time, watching Elena pace back and forth across her sitting room. We're already mated, the bond is complete. The ceremony is just tradition, spectacle. We can skip it entirely if you want. And have everyone whisper that the Alpha King is ashamed of his Omega mate? Elena countered, then immediately regretted her sharp tone. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. You meant exactly what you said, Robert interrupted gently, crossing the room to catch her hands and still her nervous movement. And you're not wrong. There will be wolves who question our bond. Who see your Omega status as a weakness. Who wonder why the Alpha King would choose you over someone more traditional. The words hurt, even though Elena knew they were true. But here's what you need to understand, Robert continued, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. I don't care what they think. I don't care about tradition or politics or what makes strategic sense. I care about you. And this ceremony, if we do it, is about showing you off to the entire territory. About declaring to everyone that you're mine and I'm yours, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally. Despite her anxiety, Elena felt her lips twitch into a smile. You really like threatening people on my behalf, don't you? It's one of my favorite hobbies, Robert admitted with a grin. Right after watching you discover things you're good at and pretending I don't notice when you steal the chocolate pastries from the kitchen before breakfast. Elena's face heated. You knew about that? Sweetheart, I'm the Alpha King. I know everything that happens in my palace. His expression softened. Including the fact that you've been having nightmares again. You wake up at 3 a.m. every night this week and pace your balcony for hours. Elena looked away, embarrassed at being caught. It's the ceremony, the thought of all those people watching me, judging me. Then we don't do it, Robert said immediately. We'll make an announcement that we've decided to keep our bonding private. Anyone who objects can. No. Elena surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. No, I want to do this. I want to stand in front of everyone and prove. She paused, searching for the right words. I want to prove to myself that I'm not ashamed of what I am. That being an Omega doesn't make me less worthy of love. That I belong beside you. Robert's eyes blazed with pride, and something fiercer. A possessive satisfaction that made Elena's wolf purr with contentment. You already belong beside me. But if you need the ceremony to believe it, then we'll give you the most spectacular bonding the Northern Territories has ever seen. The day of the ceremony. Elena woke to sunshine, streaming through her windows, and a sense of impending doom sitting heavy in her chest. Today. It was really happening today. A knock at her door revealed Chris, Pam, and another woman Elena had only met once, Juana Leonard, the palace's master seamstress who'd been working on Elena's ceremonial gown for weeks. Good morning, Luna, Juana said warmly, carrying in a dress bag that looked almost too precious to touch. Are you ready to see what we've created? Elena wasn't sure she'd ever be ready, but she nodded anyway. Juana unzipped the bag with reverent care, revealing a gown that made Elena's breath catch. It wasn't the traditional white that most Luna ceremonies featured. Instead, it was a deep, rich emerald green, the color of forest depths and growing things, the color of life persisting in darkness. Robert told me about your mother's garden, Juana explained softly. How she taught you that strength comes in unexpected forms, how the quietest things often have the deepest roots. She ran her hand along the delicate embroidery that covered the bodice, tiny flowers and vines rendered in silver thread that caught the light. This dress is a celebration of that, of you. Not despite being an Omega, but including it. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. It's perfect. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Pam helped her bathe in water infused with calming herbs. Chris, who'd become surprisingly skilled at hairstyling, wove Elena's dark hair into an intricate braid crown studded with tiny white flowers. And Juana helped her into the dress, adjusting every fold and seam until it fit like a second skin. When Elena finally looked at herself in the full-length mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked regal, strong, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with traditional standards, and everything to do with survival and growth and hard-won self-acceptance. Luna Elena, Chris whispered, her eyes wide with awe. You look like a queen. I look like me, Elena said softly. For the first time in my life I actually look like me. A knock at the door made them all turn. Christopher Hodge stood in the entrance, dressed in formal attire, his expression uncharacteristically soft. It's time, he said. The Alpha King is waiting. And between you and me, he smiled slightly. I've never seen him this nervous. He's been pacing the ceremonial hall for an hour. Elena felt some of her own anxiety ease. Robert, powerful, confident, seemingly unshakable Robert, was nervous too. Somehow that made everything feel more manageable. Then we shouldn't keep him waiting, Elena said, gathering her courage like armor. Christopher offered his arm, and Elena took it, letting him escort her through the palace halls toward the ceremonial grounds. Behind them, Chris, Pam, and Juana followed, a small protective guard of people who'd chosen to love Elena when no one else would. They emerged into the outdoor amphitheater that had been prepared for the ceremony, and Elena's breath caught. Thousands of wolves had gathered not just from the Northern Territories, but from packs across the entire region. Alphas, betas, warriors, healers, families with children. The amphitheater was packed to capacity, with more watching from the surrounding hillsides. And at the center, on a raised platform beneath an arch woven from living branches and flowers, stood Robert. He wore traditional ceremonial attire, black and silver, with intricate designs that marked him as royalty. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp lines of his face, and when his eyes found Elena's across the distance, his entire expression transformed vulnerability and love, and desperate hope, all written plainly for anyone to see. "You're so beautiful," he sent through the bond. "I forgot how to breathe. I'm terrified," Elena admitted. "Me too. Want to be terrified together?" Elena felt a laugh bubble up despite her nerves. "Yes. Together." The crowd fell silent as Elena made her way down the center aisle, every eye tracking her movement. She heard whispers, some approving, some skeptical, some openly hostile. An Omega? Really? She must be special somehow. The Alpha King doesn't make mistakes. I heard she was chained in a basement for months. Poor thing. She's beautiful. Look at her, she's barely holding it together, but she's still walking. Elena focused on Robert. On the way, he looked at her like she was the only person in the entire gathering. On the mate bond thrumming between them, steady and sure and absolutely unbreakable. She reached the platform, and Christopher placed her hand in Robert's. The contact sent warmth flooding through her, chasing away the worst of the anxiety. The officiant, a wizened elder named Wallace Nguyen, who'd presided over bonding ceremonies for over 60 years, stepped forward. "We gather today," Wallace began, his voice carrying across the silent crowd, "to witness the union of Alpha King Robert Madden and Elena Mullins. This bonding is not just a personal commitment, but a sacred promise, witnessed by the moon goddess herself." He turned to Robert first. "Alpha King, do you claim this woman as your mate, your Luna, your equal in all things? Do you vow to protect her, honor her, and stand beside her through all the challenges life may bring?" Robert's eyes never left Elena's face. "I do. I claim Elena Mullins as my mate, my Luna, the other half of my soul. I vow to protect her with my life, honor her choices, and love her every day for the rest of our existence. She is mine, and I am hers, and nothing, not tradition, not politics, not the opinions of others will ever change that." The conviction in his voice made several people in the crowd shift uncomfortably. Robert had just publicly declared that he valued Elena over tradition and politics, a radical statement for an Alpha King. Wallace turned to Elena. "And you, Elena Mullins, do you claim this man as your mate, your alpha, your equal in all things? Do you vow to stand beside him, support his leadership, and love him through all the challenges life may bring?" Elena's throat felt tight. This was it. The moment of public declaration. The point of no return. She thought about Tamara's voice, still echoing in her mind sometimes, telling her she was worthless. She thought about Javier's disgust when she'd tried to claim their bond. She thought about years of being told she didn't deserve love, didn't deserve happiness, didn't deserve to take up space in the world. And then she thought about Robert. About the way he'd burst into that basement and looked at her like she was precious. About the nights he'd held her through nightmares without complaint. About the way he'd fought for her, defended her, loved her without reservation or condition. "I do," Elena said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I claim Robert Madden as my mate, my alpha, my partner in all things. I vow to stand beside him, support him, challenge him when necessary, and love him with everything I am." She paused, gathering courage for what she wanted to add. "And I vow to be the Luna, that the vulnerable wolves of this territory deserve someone who understands what it means to be overlooked, underestimated, and undervalued. Someone who will fight for those who can't fight for themselves." The crowd erupted, some in approval, some in shock that an Omega would make such a bold declaration of intent. Robert's smile was brilliant, proud, absolutely devastating. "That's my Luna," he sent through the bond. Wallace raised his hands for silence. "Then by the power vested in me by the ancient laws and the blessing of the moon goddess, I declare you bonded. Alpha King, you may mark your mate." This was the traditional part, the moment when the alpha would bite his mate's neck, leaving a permanent mark that declared ownership and completed the bond. Elena had been dreading it, the vulnerability of it, the public nature of it. But when Robert leaned in, his breath warm against her ear, he whispered, "Trust me?" Elena nodded. Instead of biting her neck immediately, Robert cupped her face with both hands and kissed her deep and thorough and absolutely shameless in front of thousands of witnesses. Elena heard gasps and whispers, but she didn't care. She kissed him back with everything she had, pouring every ounce of love and trust and desperate hope into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Robert's eyes had gone full wolf, burning gold and utterly possessive. "Mine," he growled, low enough that only Elena could hear. "Yours," she confirmed. Only then did he lower his head to her neck, his teeth grazing her skin gently before biting down, not painfully, but firmly enough to leave a mark that would last forever. The mate bond exploded between them, more powerful than it had ever been, weaving their souls together so completely that Elena couldn't tell where she ended and Robert began. She felt his love, his pride, his absolute certainty that she was perfect exactly as she was. And she felt her own emotions reflected back through his experience of them, her strength, her resilience, her capacity for love despite everything that had tried to destroy it. When Robert pulled back, his mark gleaming silver on her neck, the crowd erupted into howls of celebration. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wallace announced, his old voice thick with emotion, "I present to you Alpha King Robert Madden and Luna Queen Elena Madden of the Northern Territories." Elena's heart stuttered at the title. Queen. She was a queen now. Robert took her hand and raised it high, presenting her to the assembled wolves. "My mate," he declared, his voice carrying with alpha authority. "My Luna, my queen. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me. Anyone who threatens her signs their own death warrant. She is under my protection, and more importantly," his smile turned fierce, "she's under her own protection, because Elena survived things that would have destroyed most of you, and she came through it with her kindness intact." He turned to look at her, his expression softening. "I am the Alpha King. But she is the real strength of this kingdom." The applause was deafening, and as Elena stood there, Robert's hand in hers, his mark on her neck, surrounded by thousands of wolves who were celebrating her. Actually celebrating her. She finally understood what her mother had meant all those years ago. The mate bond was sacred, unbreakable, worth every moment of suffering it took to find. But more than that, Elena herself was sacred, unbreakable, worth fighting for. She was enough. She had always been enough. And now, finally, she believed it. Chapter 10. The Luna Rises. 6 months later, Elena stood at the window of her private office, a space Robert had insisted she have for her work as Luna watching the sunrise paint the northern palace gardens in shades of rose gold. Her hand rested absently on her still flat stomach, a secret she and Robert had been keeping for the past 3 weeks. She was pregnant. The news had come as a shock, then a terror, then finally surprisingly a source of quiet joy. A year ago, the idea of bringing a child into the world would have seemed impossible. Elena had barely believed she deserved to survive, let alone create new life. But now she could imagine it. A little one with Robert's golden eyes or her dark hair. Someone they could raise with love and protection, and the certainty that they mattered. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Chris entered. No longer the small 13-year-old who'd brought stale bread to a basement, but a blossoming young woman of 14 who'd found her place among the palace wolves. She'd grown taller, stronger, more confident training with the warriors during the day and attending the palace school at night. "Luna Elena," Chris said, her formality breaking into a grin. "You have visitors, and you're going to want to see this." Elena followed Chris through the palace halls, curiosity building. When they emerged into the main courtyard, Elena stopped dead in her tracks. A delegation from Shadowmere stood waiting, but not the delegation she'd expected. At the front stood a young woman Elena had known peripherally from her time in Shadowmere, a fellow Omega named Elizabeth Gilmore who'd always kept her head down, her voice quiet, her presence nearly invisible. But Elizabeth stood tall now, her chin raised, confidence radiating from her in a way Elena had never seen. Behind her stood a dozen other Omegas from Shadowmere, all dressed in simple but clean clothing, all wearing expressions of nervous hope. "Luna Elena," Elizabeth said, executing a perfect bow. "Thank you for agreeing to see us." "Of course," Elena said, gesturing for them to rise. "Please, there's no need for such formality. What brings you all this way?" Elizabeth exchanged glances with the other Omegas, then took a deep breath. "We came to thank you, and to ask for your help." "Thank me? For what?" "For changing Shadowmere." Another Omega, a woman named Carolyn Michael, spoke up. "After the trial, after Alpha Javier's reforms started, things began to shift. He established new laws protecting Omegas. He required all pack members to attend education sessions about the value of every wolf, regardless of designation. He personally apologized to each of us for the culture he'd allowed to exist. But more than that, Elizabeth continued, her voice gaining strength, he told us about you, about your courage, about how you survived years of abuse and came through it strong enough to advocate for the very pack that hurt you. You became our inspiration, Luna Elena. Our proof that Omegas aren't weak, we're survivors. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. I didn't do anything special. I just survived. Exactly, Elizabeth said fiercely. You survived when you shouldn't have. And then you thrived. You became Luna Queen of the Northern Territories. You proved that an Omega can stand beside the most powerful Alpha in existence and be his equal. She paused, her expression vulnerable. We want to learn from you, want to understand how you found your strength, how you learned to believe you were worth something. Elena looked at these women, at the hope and determination in their faces, and saw herself reflected back, saw the girl she'd been, broken and desperate, convinced she was worthless. Come inside, Elena said softly. Let's talk. The hours that followed were both painful and healing. Elena told them her story, all of it, holding nothing back. The abuse, the basement, the years of being told she was nothing. But she also told them about the healing process, about Lena Walker's therapy sessions, about learning to separate her trauma responses from her identity, about discovering that survival itself was a form of strength. The hardest part, Elena admitted, was learning to trust myself, to trust that my feelings were valid, that my experiences mattered, that I deserved good things. She looked around at the assembled Omegas. I still struggle with it sometimes. I still hear Tamara's voice telling me I'm worthless. But now I have other voices too, Robert's, Chris's, Pam's, my own, reminding me of the truth. How do we find those voices? Carolyn asked. How do we start believing we matter when we've been told our whole lives that we don't? Elena considered the question carefully. You start small. You find one person who sees your worth, even if it's just yourself, looking in a mirror, and forcing yourself to name one good thing about who you are. And then you build from there. One person, one day, one moment of choosing to believe you deserve better. She paused, an idea forming. Actually, what if we made this official? What if we established a support network for Omegas across all the Northern Territories? A place where we could gather, share our experiences, help each other heal and grow. Elizabeth's eyes lit up. You would do that? Create something like that? Not just me, Elena corrected. We would create it, together. Because this can't be about me standing on a platform telling others how to heal. It has to be about all of us supporting each other, learning from each other, lifting each other up. The Omegas exchanged glances, excitement building among them. We could call it the Luna's Circle, Chris suggested, from where she'd been quietly observing, a space where every Omega is treated like a Luna, valued, respected, heard. The Luna's Circle, Elena repeated, testing the words. I love it. That evening, Elena found Robert in their shared quarters. They'd finally combined their spaces 2 months ago. Elena ready at last to share not just a bond but a life fully intertwined with his. He was reviewing documents at his desk, but he looked up immediately when she entered, his expression transforming into the soft smile he reserved only for her. How did the meeting with the Shadowmere Omegas go? He asked. Beautifully, terrifyingly, perfectly. Elena crossed to him, and he pulled her into his lap without hesitation, arranging her against his chest like she belonged there. She did. I'm starting a support network, the Luna's Circle, for Omegas across all territories. Robert's chest rumbled with approval. That's my Luna. Changing the world one bold initiative at a time. I can't believe I'm doing this, Elena admitted. A year ago, I was chained in a basement. Now I'm creating programs and making policy decisions, and people are looking to me for guidance. You're exactly where you're meant to be, Robert said firmly. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Though I have to admit, watching you come into your power has been the greatest privilege of my life. You're magnificent, Elena. Absolutely magnificent. Elena felt warmth bloom in her chest, not just from his words, but from the mate bond singing between them, letting her feel the absolute sincerity of his pride and love. There's something else, she said, nervous energy making her fidget with the buttons on his shirt. Something I need to tell you. Robert stilled, his attention sharpening. What is it? Are you all right? I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air between them for 3 heartbeats. Then Robert's eyes went molten gold, his entire body going rigid with shock and joy, and something primal that made Elena's wolf whimper with satisfaction. Pregnant, he breathed. We're having a baby, Elena confirmed, her hand covering his where it had instinctively moved to her stomach. Pam confirmed it 3 weeks ago. I wanted to be sure before I told you, wanted to process it myself first. 3 weeks? Robert's voice cracked. You've been sitting on this news for 3 weeks? I was scared, Elena admitted. Scared of what it means. Scared I won't be a good mother. Scared. Robert silenced her with a kiss deep and thorough and full of every emotion he couldn't put into words. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. You're going to be an incredible mother, he said fiercely. You already know exactly what a child needs: protection, love, the certainty that they matter. You'll give our child everything you never had. We'll give them everything, Elena corrected. Together. Robert's smile was brilliant. He slid from the chair to his knees, pressing his face against Elena's stomach, with a reverence that made her heart ache. Hello, little one, he murmured. I'm your father, and I can't wait to meet you. Elena's tears finally spilled over, and she ran her fingers through Robert's dark hair, marveling at how far she'd come. From the basement to this, to a man on his knees before her, speaking words of love to the child they'd created together. I love you, she whispered. Robert looked up, his golden eyes blazing with absolute devotion. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You and this baby, you're my whole world, Elena. My entire reason for existing. 1 year later, Luna Queen Elena Madden stood before an audience of over 500 Omegas from across the Northern Territories and beyond. The first annual gathering of the Luna's Circle had drawn wolves from regions Robert didn't even technically govern. The word had spread, and Omegas were traveling from hundreds of miles away to be part of this movement. On her hip, Elena balanced a 6-month-old baby girl with Robert's golden eyes and Elena's dark hair, little Penelope, who'd been born healthy and strong, and absolutely adored by everyone in the palace. When I started the Luna's Circle a year ago, Elena said, her voice carrying across the assembly hall, I thought it would be small. A handful of Omegas supporting each other, sharing our stories, helping each other heal. But you've made it so much more than that. She looked around at the assembled wolves, Omegas, yes, but also alphas and betas who'd come to learn, to support, to understand how to build packs where every member truly mattered. You've created a movement. A revolution, really. Because you're proving every single day that Omega doesn't mean weak. It doesn't mean less than. It means we've survived things that should have destroyed us, and we came through it with our capacity for love and compassion intact. That's not weakness, that's the most powerful kind of strength there is. Applause erupted, and Elena felt her throat tighten with emotion. I see you, she continued when the noise died down. I see every Omega in this room who's still fighting to believe they matter. I see you because I was you. I am you, and I'm here to tell you that it gets better. That you are worthy of love, of protection, of every good thing this world has to offer. And anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. Penelope chose that moment to grab Elena's hair, gurgling happily, and the audience laughed, a warm, genuine sound that spoke of community and acceptance. Robert appeared at Elena's side, gently rescuing her from their daughter's grip. He pressed a kiss to Elena's temple, his pride in her, evident in every line of his body. That's my Luna, he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. Changing the world one speech at a time, Elena looked out at the assembled wolves, at Chris, now 15 and training to be a warrior, sitting in the front row with tears on her face. At Elizabeth Gilmore, who'd become the Luna's Circle's first official coordinator. At the dozens of Omegas who'd found their voices, their strength, their certainty that they deserved better. At the alphas and betas who'd come to learn how to build better, kinder packs. At the future she was helping to create, one where no Omega would ever be chained in a basement, told they were worthless, or made to feel like they didn't deserve love. Thank you, Elena said softly, addressing the crowd one last time. Thank you for trusting me with your stories. Thank you for being brave enough to believe you matter. Thank you for proving that together, we can change everything. As the gathering broke into howls of celebration, the traditional wolf expression of joy and unity, Elena felt Robert's arms wrap around her, and Penelope, pulling them close. "Happy?" he asked through their bond. "Completely," Elena answered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. She'd survived the basement, survived the abuse, survived being told she was nothing. And now she was everything: Luna Queen, mother, advocate, survivor, warrior in her own right. She was proof that broken wings could heal, that wolves who'd been told they were weak could rise and become legends. That love, real, genuine, unconditional love, could transform even the deepest wounds into sources of strength. Elena Mullins had been chained in a basement, while her mate chose another. But Elena Madden, Luna Queen of the Northern Territories, had broken those chains and built something beautiful from the wreckage. And she was just getting started. Epilogue. 5 years later. The Northern Palace gardens were filled with laughter. Elena watched from her favorite bench as Penelope, now 5.5, precocious and bold, played with her younger brother, 3-year-old Peter, named after Robert's father. The children were chasing butterflies through the flowers, their joy infectious. Chris, now 20 and one of the palace's most respected warriors, sat beside Elena, her own mate, a gentle beta named Ivan Webb, watching the children with fond amusement. "Remember when you told me you'd never deserve happiness?" Chris asked, her tone teasing. "I remember you telling me I was wrong." Elena replied with a smile. "I was right. You were right." In the distance, Elena could see Robert conducting a meeting with several alphas, including Javier Ingram, who'd become one of Robert's most trusted allies. Shadowmere had transformed under Javier's leadership, becoming a model for how to build a pack that valued all its members. Javier had never taken another mate, said he didn't deserve one after what he'd done, but he'd poured all that energy into being the alpha Elena had deserved all along, just for different wolves, in a different time. The Luna's circle had expanded beyond Elena's wildest dreams. There were chapters in over 100 territories now, providing support, resources, and community for Omegas everywhere. And the cultural shift was real. Omegas were no longer automatically dismissed as weak. They were healers, teachers, warriors, leaders. They were valued. "Mama," Penelope called, running toward Elena with a butterfly perched on her finger. "Look, she landed on me." "She knows you're special," Elena said, admiring the delicate creature. "As special as you?" Penelope asked seriously. Elena's throat tightened. "More special. Because you're growing up knowing you matter. You'll never doubt your worth." "Of course I matter," Penelope said, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. "Daddy tells me every day. And you tell me. And Uncle Christopher tells me. And Chris tells me." She paused, thinking. "Everyone tells me." "Good," Elena whispered. "Never forget it." Penelope kissed Elena's cheek and ran back to her brother, the butterfly taking flight. Robert appeared moments later, sliding onto the bench and pulling Elena against his side. "Council meeting's done. How are my favorite wolves?" "Perfect," Elena said, watching their children play in gardens that had once seemed impossible to reach. "Absolutely perfect." Robert's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing as naturally as breathing. The mate bond thrummed between them, still strong, still certain, still absolutely unbreakable after all these years. "I love you," Robert murmured into her hair. "I love you too," Elena replied. "Thank you." "For what?" "For finding me. For believing I was worth saving. For teaching me how to fly." Robert pressed a kiss to her temple. "You taught yourself how to fly, sweetheart. I just made sure nothing clipped your wings ever again." And as they sat there together, watching their children play in the sunshine, surrounded by people who loved them, Elena finally understood the full truth of what her mother had told her all those years ago. The mate bond was sacred, unbreakable, worth every moment of darkness it took to find the light. But more important than any bond, any destiny, any prophecy, Elena herself was sacred, unbreakable, worth fighting for. She'd been chained in a basement, but she'd risen as a queen, and she would spend the rest of her life making sure no other wolf ever had to fight as hard as she had just to believe they deserved to exist. The Luna had risen, and she was glorious. As we close Elena's story, here's a question worth considering. Do you believe Javier deserved the redemption arc he got? Or should some betrayals be unforgivable? Elena chose mercy over vengeance, but not everyone has to make that choice. What would you have done in her position? Share your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you stand. And if this story resonated with you, a like would mean the world. It tells us these deeper, emotional journeys are worth creating.